I got diagnosed, and one of my early thoughts were like, what about rowing? Which is so ridiculous. But actually, like, how lucky that is. Like, how great is that I had that to think about? And a lot of people said, oh, why did you carry on? And I'm like, well, if I'd have thought, well, this is an opportunity to stop, then maybe I'm not doing the right thing.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Last Stroke Counts. Today's guest is a Paralympic champion, world record holder, and breast cancer survivor. It's with great pleasure that we can welcome Erin Kennedy to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. Again, thanks for coming, but thanks for coming to our club. It's such a good venue. There's no surprise we keep using it.
For Spotify people, where are we?
We're in the Leander library again, which is a gorgeous venue, like really nice. One of the biggest collection of books, rowing books in the world.
Yeah, I'd love for someone to fact check me on this, but I think it's the oldest rowing library in the world.
We'll go with that, yeah.
It might be as well, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure someone will jump on and tell you if you're wrong, so.
Perfect, more engagement, more angry people in comments.
We're not quite at that level where annoyed people are commenting on our videos yet. That's a new level of fame.
I don't know. I don't know if you want it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm fine for now. Don't comment. Also, I'm really excited about this one. Talking about, overcoming adversity. I think you've got an incredible story, which we'll get onto more. Also, kind of delve into the Paralympic system. You're the first athlete we've had on who's been involved in that. So that's going to be interesting as well. And then, talking about, what it takes to get to the top and stay on top for quite a few years, as you have done. So, it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Start where we normally do at the beginning. How I know how you got into rowing, but for everyone else, how did you get into rowing?
So I always feel like, I think about rowing and I'm like, I haven't done it for that long. And now I'm like, I'm actually older than I think. And I have done it for a little while now. So I started rowing 2011. Yeah. And I was 19 and I started at Pembroke College in Oxford. And to be honest, I did sport. I was sporty as a kid, but not definitely jack of all trades, master of none, decent at netball. I did decent at swimming. I did PE GCSE and one of them was weightlifting. So, but then the other one was dance. So, really mix it up.
Bit of both.
Yeah. And I did loads of musical theatre and drama and singing. And I love that. And yeah, I basically went to Pembroke, picked Pembroke actually, in Oxford, basically because it had a great choir and stuff like that. And then my first week went down in Freshers Week to just see what rowing was all about. And I sort of felt like it was a bit of a rite of passage to give it a go. Like, I think there's mad stats, like a third of all students from undergrad through to postgrad get in a boat at some point in their studies.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So with postgrad, it must be like a third. Paddy said in Cambridge, it's like 50% of student population try rowing. That's an incredible stat.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, totally. And like everyone just gives it a go, and some people go, "Oh, not for me." But I just loved it. Like the college experience for me was kind of set up my love for the sport, and why I do it and why I still love it. And I think find any cox that doesn't like people, and they're probably not a very good cox. Coxing is all about kind of cultivating and being an architect of a team. That's how I sort of see it. And ideally, ironically, as a cox, you're sort of the silent architect, because you're sort of managing people, managing teams, managing dynamics, managing coaches sometimes, managing athletes, managing their relationships and all that sort of thing. So ultimately, when we're on the water and you're asking for something and everyone's on the red line already, that they're going to make that change and give it to you. And yeah, I started at Pembroke and I met some amazing people.
Sounds like you were in human resources when you're in a coxing seat, like get that HR promotion.
Talking about jack of all trades, but it is, but in a good way. You need to have those different abilities, and you sit right between. We've talked about it. You're a coach, but you are also an athlete, and you're neither, but you're both at the same time. It's a very strange dynamic, I think. But so did you start by rowing first?
No. So I'm also quite unusual because some coxes, like Morgan Road and obviously Matilda Horn Road and some of my kind of peers of my generation, and then they sort of moved into coxing for various reasons. But for me, I basically, they turned up. I'm 5'2", as per every club in the country. Generally, they're a little bit short on coxes.
Yeah.
No pun intended. And they were literally like, have you thought about this? And I don't think anyone really talks about it, but starting to cox is really hard and really stressful because unlike, rowing or anything else, and even in other team sports, you can't just stop and then someone explain exactly how to do it or what to do or demonstrate. Like, it's you and an 8, and you are literally in charge of everyone's safety. You need to do your job and steer and all these sorts of things. Like, steering a boat is like steering nothing else.
It's like driving the car, but you have no access to the pedals.
Yeah.
You can't change gear. You can only it's like voice controlled Tesla or something.
Yeah.
Instead of being able to see out the windscreen, there's basically no windscreen.
Yeah.
And you have to poke your head out on either side.
Yeah. And I remember, the club shall remain nameless, but it's not one of the clubs I've coxed regularly. But I jumped into Cox at Wallingford Head a fair few number of years ago. And again, Wallingford, big S-bends. That's some of the biggest challenges for coxes, and I think it's one of the harder head races, in the south to do with the S-bends. And I remember being like, okay, we need to row harder stroke side, lighter bow side, because I had this tiny little rudder on this Felipe or whatever I was in. And then, computer said no, just carried on doing the same. And I just remember being like you said, you've got no control of the gear. So I'm like, well, this rudder's not going to do nothing like this. And I remember being like literally I was almost at the point where I was like, you're going to have to drop out. We need to get around. Someone fell off their seat, going around the F-bends. I ended up steering with my arms, which I've never done. I've only seen it on reels and TikTok. What no one ever talks about is how absolutely drenched you get, because obviously you just literally put your arm in and obviously all the water comes in the boat. And obviously it was ahead, so it was about November. But yeah, they're uncontrollable. You're trying to, all you got are your words, and sometimes people don't listen.
Yeah.
So it's effectively kind of trying to direct a dog sled cart, isn't it? You've just got eight rabid nutters in front of you that are trying to work their ass off, and you've kind of got to bring them in the reins.
Corral them.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it's a strange. I always find a funny thing, the coxing dynamic as well. It's how much you can lie to your crew. There is times when it's required, but if you do it too much, then you lose faith. And there is exactly what you said. There's so much about coxing. I think there's still so much that's just not known by so many people that do it. I think when I first got into the college system, I was like, cool, I rode for a really long time. I've coached at Leander. I'm going to have no problem helping any of these people. And then the Cox is like, well, what do I do? I'm like, oh. I don't, I really had to kind of sit down and be like, what do I know and what don't I know? And go over it and start learning these things again. I think, And again, of any system, the one where the Cox is most important, I would say, something like bumps racing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You're so much more responsible. You're responsible for so much more than in many other races. And I think you can have such a bigger impact.
Yeah.
Certainly than anything else at that level.
Oh,
when you get higher, definitely.
Yeah, and I think, I think the Cox is sort of like a goalie. Fundamentally you're doing something different to everybody else, on the field of play. And ideally, right, a good goalie, their work goes unnoticed 95% of the time because they're just doing their job, which is, being effective, being efficient, stopping balls getting in. And then I think that you've got the times when you slip up and you make a mistake and everyone knows about it. It's very open, it's very clear, It can involve anything from, making roll calls in the race, but to as obvious as crashing, it's pretty clear. Yeah. But then sometimes you have those moments where you pull a race out of the bag, you do something normally on the water that just blows everyone away and you turn the tide of a race or you make a strategic call. And that's those few saves a season that everyone still talks about and that penalty or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think there's similarity in it. You are a little bit isolated in the team environment, but it's sort of necessary as well.
I can see an issue also with giving feedback to coxes. Coxes are so prone just to get negative bashing about every single mistake they've done. Be like, oh, here's no feedback for 2 weeks, and be like a list of things that you've done wrong in the last 2 weeks, and be like, well, this isn't useful or anything. Give me something positive. How am I supposed to improve if I only if I don't get told if I'm doing a good job or this or that, it's difficult. It's like a goalie, right? Unless you have a massive fuck up or something like that, like you tend to stay under the radar.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the big highs and the low lows, and then for the middle, you're just kind of ignored. Yeah, I think it's also funny that it's considered acceptable at the end of the session to cough and say, you did that wrong, you did that wrong, you did that wrong. But like, God forbid, like a Cox would be like 7, like you're just not getting your, you know, like there's like certainly like a little bit more negativity seems like acceptable one way than the other.
Yeah, I think so. And so I think like there is a change. I think there is a slow turning of the tide towards actually understanding that coxes should be coached. And there is real added value for that. And because, you know, coxes, I would say actually they're probably really, really keen to learn and keen to be coached and keen to have that input, because a lot of coxes do go through that really negative cycle, and they're still there. They're still turning up and they're doing it. So think how much more validated and how much more encouraged and stuff they would be if they did get that coaching. And something that you know, myself and there's 5 other coxes have kind of set up this WOX, which is the Winning Cox, which is trying to basically provide, you know, free, accessible guidance for coxes and how to develop them, whether you are new or you're really experienced, but then also coaches as well. Like, how do you coach your coxes? Because, you know, particularly, let's think of some of the top boys' schools, you know, if we go all the way back down to kind of the schooling system, you know, like a cox can, you know, make or break you winning the PE, you know, and now we've got obviously, you know, the women's 8s coming into Henley as well, and the women's school 8s, and how then that's going to turn the tide. And you know, developing those coxes, it's not just 1%. You will make sure everything's right on your boat. You'll make sure it's on weight. You'll make sure everything. But if you're not developing that cox, like, your athletes might not end up getting there warmed up. They might not, you know, make that call in the middle of the race.
Absolutely. The contribution of a cox is not just to steer the boat straight and to get the crew moving. It's like, you know, reading their race, like when the dynamic or the tempo of it's changed halfway through. Okay, we have a gap here in the next 10 strokes to make a move, because other crew are, you know, just coming down from their burst and all sorts of things. So it's like really important to share that knowledge, especially for the lack of coxing resources. I think we've had like 6 or 7 coxes on the podcast so far. It's just really important, like, to talk about, you know, how to maximize these contributions, like, made for the crew. But also, like, what you said a minute ago, which is how coxes just really also want to push themselves like athletes. And like, it makes sense, right? It's such a competitive sport. You come into it, you can't necessarily contribute physically to the race. So you're just going to like drive yourself up the wall, like mentally, and trying to improve, trying to find an edge, etc., etc. So it's.
But yeah, also I've spent a lot of time in 8s, like from the athlete's perspective, like you can work so much harder if you're not having to worry about those other things. It's sort of like the difference between, you know, rowing out in a single on yourself or just being on the erg. Like, if you're in a single and you're looking around and you're wondering how it's going and what's my race tactic and when am I going to go, whereas if you've got someone else doing all that for you, then you've got 8 guys who are just erging it forward, and like then you can really maximize your physical performance. So you're also like taking a lot of the decision making or the work away from the athlete in order to let them like specialize and make the boat go faster. So like, yeah, I think we've said, and I know everyone says it's a bit of cliche, but like, so unsung heroes of rowing. And you know, I've even had coaches said to me, maybe when I have criticized a cox, be like, you do it. Oh, yeah, I think you span wrong that, you know, down there. Well, the stream's pretty high and there were 6 boats around, so like, you have a go, mate. You know, like, you really want that responsibility, or do you want to shut up and just row?
Yeah. Shut up and row. Yeah, and I think, you know, like, coxes are one of the things we're always trying to do with WOX is build a bit more of a community with coxes, because I've talked about, you are that sort of isolated person, but actually, I think like maybe historically, because, you know, I would say the pyramid is sort of very, very like this, very, 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 very shallow. You've got a lot of people who maybe casually cox or get bullied into coxing or use rowing, gives it a go, through to, you know, then you've got your schools and clubs, and then, you know, you've got obviously places like, you know, your top end clubs where people obviously kind of looking up towards under 23s potentially, or trying to break into the senior squads. And then, at the top, you've literally got 3 coxes in the GB rowing team, and it gets pretty pointy pretty quick. And I think one of the challenges with coxing as well is it's really subjective. It really, really does depend on the coach you're working with, the crew you're working with. I would say there's like a history of the people you're working with as well. Like if you have coxed them for a while, even if it wasn't in that particular setup, it's going to give you an innate advantage because you know what they're working on, how they've developed, what they respond to, all these sorts of things. And so it does, there's not a lot of space on the shelf, I think, for kind of that top level. And so then I think it breeds potentially sometimes a culture of like, protective, this is mine, I can't share my stuff, I can't share my kind of, whether it's recordings or advice. And that's sort of one of the reasons we all sort of wanted to come together and go like, why not? Like, and I'm going to call out in the best possible way. Like Rory Copus has got so many coxing recordings online, which is absolutely amazing. But if you try and find female coxers online and their racing recordings, you'll get about 3 or 4 hits of like top international, high level, really important races.
And that's only because Morgan's put 2 on in the last year.
Exactly. Yeah. And how many of them are when they don't win? How many of them are training? Because let's be honest, who wants to listen to 50 minutes of training? I get that. But you might want to listen to 5-minute segments and little bits and bobs. And actually understanding, okay, what's a training piece like? What's a UT1 piece like? What's a race piece? What happens when you're up and then you drop down? Like, how do you cox then?
Absolutely. I mean, even like listening back to like session recordings can be really useful. I remember like I set up 4 of our coxes when we were coaching in Oxford College a couple of years ago with a mic, and they went through the exact same session in the program like over the course of 2 days, and we were doing race prep, and we probably got about 45 minutes recording or something like this, but it was so interesting like how they handled the crew, how they managed the nerves pre-start, how do they spin, how do they calm down, how do they correct their members when they like make a mistake, etc. So it could be absolutely very useful to coxes, but like who would have even thought to put a training recording up onto YouTube or onto another platform that can be listened to? Yeah,
technology's moved on, which has made it easier. Obviously, before it was like a little dictaphone to plug it into your computer, and now it just like the Coxbox does it for you.
Yeah, like
things have changed.
I think like it's great. Like Coxorb does it for you. I actually mostly use NK now, partly because I prefer like having an NK stroke coach, so find the data's a little bit more reactive, and then it also matches my stroke man as well, because obviously I'm in a bow loaded 4. Our stroke coach is quite a long way away, so sometimes the data's slightly off, and I don't want to be calling something and he's like, the splits are fine. So I find that's kind of better. But then I actually use my Apple Watch. I just do a voice note on my Apple Watch.
Oh, okay.
So there you go. Top tip for any coxes who don't have a Coxorb necessarily is like there are multiple ways to do it. Like I'm not advising anyone takes their phone in the boat necessarily. However, if it's a dry day and you're not going to capsize, I don't want to be responsible for any phones at the bottom of the Thames, but you can tuck it into a waterproof and even do a voice note there. And I think encouraging feedback, because let's say a coach is relatively new or hasn't normally coached coxes before. Here's a really easy way to start is basically, here's a recording. Can we sit down and go through it together?
Yeah.
Because also a lot of the time coaches can't hear what the cox is saying.
Yeah, I realised we when I was coaching at Oxford College, it was from the launch. I mean, I can't hear a thing the coach is saying, that the cox is saying. And I started doing this thing. I kept it a secret. So I thought this is a real advantage. I'm not coaching anymore, so I don't mind. Everyone else can hear. I ride a motorbike, and I take my wife on the back, and you can buy like a 2-way radio. It's pretty cheap, like on Amazon, 40, 50 quid, I think. So I took the 2-way radios, which are normally supposed to fit in a helmet. I strapped them to the coxing headset. So the cox would be hooked up to the cox box as normal, but also would have like a 2-way link to me. So it was at times slightly disruptive to the rowers, because they would hear only one side of conversation, but certainly for like novice coxes, for brand new, to have like direct contact, and then also for me to just stay quiet and hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think we pushed on, like that was really good. It means you're not shouting over a river at 7 a.m, annoying everyone, like not really understanding each other. Just have this like 2-way radio thing. So yeah, if anyone wants to try that on out, we found that like super useful. Certainly to start with, I think potentially a little bit of a hindrance once the coxes got to the level where they should be capable to do it on themselves, but they had this crutch. So rather than make a decision, it would be like, oh, Tom, should I do this now? Like, you should do that. So there's a time and a place for it, not always.
Yeah,
especially something we found.
Especially when you got ringer coxes or coxes who are just jumping in for a session and they have no idea what they're doing. Cool, don't worry, I can see what you're doing. Here's a radio, do this, and that. It's fine.
I mean, that's a great idea. I mean, to some extent, like I might steal that for when we go out to Baresi, because we go on, long paddles, 16 plus K or whatever, and then the coach is there, and obviously she's got radio. I normally have the radio then hooked up so you can talk directly through the radio into kind of the speakers, but yeah, she can't hear what I'm saying. So, and sometimes I'm like, especially like a long session, I'm like, right, we're really going to dig into this technical change. And I'm like 3-4 minutes in, it's really good. And then it's like, I'm, on the front end of this, she's like, we're really going to focus on the back end now. And I'm like, oh, come on. And so, I think like that's the big thing. It's relationships with coaches and coxes. And, it goes both ways. You need to, as a cox, be proactive and push that. But it's also for coaches to carve the time out, I think, and be receptive.
Now that I think about it, when you got that radio on, because obviously you got headphones and there's a microphone input already like coming into the coach, etc., that might also be quite easy to like record based off of that, because you've already got a stream of.
There were some really expensive systems that you can use, but we were just using a cheap one. We did it for 3 years. I think I spent 50 quid on it. Once you charged it up, it would do like 8 hours, so you could do for like 2 or 3 or 4, almost a week's worth of sessions before needing to do it again. Well, we went one session a day, but it worked quite well for its use.
So we're talking about all this coxing advice and all this coxing knowledge, and just in general from around the sport. I want to reverse back to 12 years ago when you first fell in love with the sport and like what that looked like for you.
So I just really enjoyed the team dynamic of it, I would say, is kind of the people, the common shared goal with, a relatively intimate number of people, whether it's a 4 or an 8, and sort of driving towards kind of one common thing. And I think, hey, it's the best and the worst thing about rowing, right? Like, you need everybody to literally show up, otherwise you can't go rowing. And it's that mutual dependency, but builds, I think that forces relationships to build much quicker, like kind of this unity together. And I think it's really kind of the people that kind of got me into the love of the sport. And I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I'm unbelievably competitive, and I like competing and winning things as well. Like, I think sometimes people shy away from the fact that they enjoy success and doing well, but like, of course we do, everyone does, and I remember kind of just getting, that you get those wins and you get those buzzes and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, like, and I want this and I want this. And I think for me, it was trying to kind of better myself and improve myself and get better at it. And I was really encouraged in it by my coach back then, and continuing. So Barry John Mulder was my coach. He used to row for, I think he did low level kind of South Africa stuff, and then came over, coached the college. And then Ben Reed, who I literally bumped into in Henley earlier today, used to come over from Wallingford and help our top crews out in the summer all the way through. Then I did the boat race, and that was a whole new ball game. And Christine Wilson and Natasha Townsend, kind of, that stepped it on for me, to be honest. They are incredible coaches, so invested in every individual athlete and getting the best out of them. And don't get me wrong, it was really tough. Like, Christine is, she's like a massive mentor to me now. Still sort of scares me a tiny bit, but in like the way that, because I have so much respect for her as a person and what she built at EWBC. And I think it's the people, really. It's the people combined with the winning that I think really, really makes me love it.
Yeah. And also,
what year was did the boat race did you do?
So I did 2014. So I actually did the last women's boat race at Henley.
Henley, yeah.
Yeah, and it felt kind of really momentous, to be honest. And I loved it. Kind of the athletes that I was coaching and coxing, really good friends with. still to this day. It's actually terrifyingly, the next boat race is our 10-year like reunion. And, you know, when you're doing it, you're like, oh, look at all these people coming back for reunions. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's me. Even thinking about a 5-year reunion, I think, gosh, I've done a lot of life since then. It's really cool. And I think, yeah, it was an amazing kind of system to be a part of.
How did you find transitioning from bumps into obviously racing for Oxford, the Blue Squad?
Terrifying. The commitment scared me, if I'm honest. And like Pembroke took it pretty seriously, and then I was like, oh, okay. And it was in my final year as well. So I was, you know, doing finals and all that sort of thing. And it was nuts. I definitely kept it on the download to my college as much as possible by how much rowing I was doing. I remember meeting with the Masters Review, and they'd kind of meet with all the students at the first term, and they'd seen that I wasn't really doing Pembroke stuff anymore. And they were like, we think this is really good that you're focusing on your work. And I'm thinking that's because I'm spending all my time in Wallingford instead.
Please hold off that press release for as long as possible.
And it was just, it was nuts. And I think, the commitment was terrifying, but kind of the lessons learned was huge. And there was myself and two of the coxes who were trialing, Olivia and Beth. And I think that was maybe the first time that I really sort of realised, you know, there was like this sort of community of coxes. Like we were all really good mates. On training camp, we all shared a room. It was just really fun. Beth then sort of didn't carry on from earlier in the year, and then it was basically myself and Olivia, and it was really interesting. I think that was maybe the first time I was like, okay, I think I'm quite good at this. Like I think I've got something here. It's like Olivia was an amazing cox who doesn't still cox anymore, but she'd cox at St Paul's. Like she'd you know, coxing through and through, like all the way through the schooling system. And so I was a big old underdog, and I got the blue boat, and she coxed to Cyrus, and you know, she was also a massive lesson in, you know, being gracious in defeat, and we still worked really well together. And I think that taught some really good lessons as well about how I wanted to be as a cox as well.
Anything that you think gave you the edge over an experienced cox?
I think I was quite exciting, maybe. I think maybe because I hadn't gone through the kind of, here's how you do it, this is the blueprint, I was winging it. Basically, I was flying by the seat of my pants. So maybe sometimes I'd come out with things and they were like, what? I definitely think where I was at disadvantage was my steering. It's something I had to work really, really hard on. And now I don't even think about it, obviously. But steering is something that people don't really talk about very much because it's boring. But ultimately, it's really flipping hard. And actually, you know, steering the right line and feeling the water and giving feedback and blah, 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 you know, all the things is quite a lot. So Olivia was a lot more kind of consistent. But I think as I basically worked my butt off over kind of the course of that kind of 8-month trial period, I kind of managed to kind of get myself on top. But I think it's the excitingness. I'm going to throw it out there that I don't think anyone is as spontaneous or excited as Morgan Bayman Williams. I've listened to some of her recordings and I'm like, you absolute nutter. How did you win this race when you just shouted at 12:50, you're a wizard, Harry? But like, it's sort of, you know, she really pulls on like in jokes and all these sorts of things to kind of really flip it around. And that is just, I mean, if you meet Morgan in real life, obviously, I know you guys know her well. That's exactly who she is. And that is who she is when she's coxing as well. So I would say that, I'm just like a less certain version of her.
Okay. I think Morgan is the trust, like you build that in stuff is like such a trust thing. Like I've been coxing Henley campaigns and unfortunately lost a couple Henley finals with her. But like if you're 12:50 out and Morgan says, we need to go now, you're like, shit.
Yeah.
We need to go.
I don't have another gear. You're a wizard, Harry. All right, let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah, but
she reads the room really well, yeah.
Or the river. Yeah. So being authentic is so important, right? And I have a little saying, you know, different is better than better. So sometimes following the blueprint isn't necessarily the way to get the top spot. And I think you've proved that with that.
Yeah.
I'm interested just quickly with steering. What made you struggle with steering? It's presumably having to steer whilst doing all the other things. Like if you only had to steer, it wouldn't be hard.
No,
You're right.
no. If you only steered. And I remember a very serious conversation with David Tanner when I first joined the junior team.
A serious conversation with David Tanner. That's a...
I don't think there's anything that's, to be fair, I don't think any conversation with him isn't serious.
There's no other version of that conversation. No.
And I remember him just sort of saying to me, and I was kind of very new on the team. I was out in a viz with the women's squad. And he said, now I want to ask you a question. Is basically if the rudder broke or the microphone broke, what would you prefer in the middle of a race? And I was like, well, microphone. And he was like, correct. And I was thinking, if I'd have got that wrong, would I have been cut? Like, like what were the consequences of this conversation? But obviously I got the right answer, so we'll never know. But yeah, I think for me, where I really struggled with steering when I was first going is, don't get me wrong, I could steer fantastically on the ISIS because you are the most reactionary rudder monkey there is, and you have to be super, super, super on it. But I actually struggled more in like really open lakes, new places, because you're trying to fix on a point when it's just trees. They all look the same. Like what am I looking at? I didn't particularly struggle. Like one of my first, I think the first race I ever did off the ISIS with the OUW development squad was I just jumped straight into the booms and steered Henny Women's, and no crashing, never touched a boom, thankfully. But that was fine because you're steering off the booms. It was kind of big open expanses. It was that training camp. We went out to Sabaudia, which is an amazing lake. But I remember Christy like stopping and being like, Erin, look behind you. And you'd look and, the trail of like a little kind of snake had been going along. And I was like, ooh. And even with the best one in the world and you take your hands off, you're still reactive. But I got there in the end.
It's exactly the same steering and rowing as well. And the same thing. I right towards the end of my career, I actually got to that mystical point of like not having to think about it, like it just was happening. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. And then I remember probably not even a couple of years after I retired, jumping out in a pair and being like, oh yeah, I can steer, and then being like awful. I mean, like, this isn't something that you just keep. Like, you need to be doing it all the time. Like, it's a skill that you need to be like learning the whole time.
Yeah, and it's just that awareness, and it's the ultimate kind of multitasking and things like that. And thankfully, I'm at a point. I mean, not gonna lie, Bow Loader 4 comes with its challenges, but it is easier to steer. It definitely is, because where it's hard to steer when you first get in is because you can't see your peripherals, right? So you need to trust. Once you know how long your blades are, you're all right. But obviously, you can't see the blades behind you, so you need to make sure that you're safe and clear. But you got no one in front of you, and also even if there is absolute chaos behind me, I can't see it. Whereas actually I can't tell you how distracting it is if you're trying to lead a build out or something like this, and you can just see absolute carnage in front of you with the 4 or 8 rowers who happen to be rowing at the time and steer and do all of those things. So I do think desensitizing it and removing the distractions helps in a bow loader.
I mean, I was just gonna say, like, what is the reason? Like, that must be half of the reason for having a bow loader. It's certainly not like aerodynamics. I don't think would come into it a lot. Slightly.
I think it is a little bit more aero, and
weight distribution.
Yeah, weight distribution, and I also think, it tends to be where I think kind of the top shells and stuff are kind of all moving towards it, and I do think it probably is. It probably is better that you're just kind of down in the bows, down out the way. Like, the downside, I think, of being in a bow loader is if you have a good front end, it's heavy. And I'm just weighing that down. So especially in the winter when I'm like layered up, in the summer, like, I've literally got a Lycra on and a visor, you're fine. But in the winter, I am very, very much kind of tucked up in the warm. So yeah, I think it does help. I find, one of the downsides again of a bow loader is when you're in the midst of a race and if you're half a length up, it's harder to see. So you need better comms between you and your bow person if someone's coming back up on you or whatever. But I find that it means I'm more able to be more relaxed in my coxing, because even if you're 3/4 of the length up on the rest of the field, for example, when you're in an 8, you've still got the bow pair alongside you of multiple other boats, and it feels a lot more frenetic. And you're like, even your body language, you see them and they're like, tucked over, whereas I'm just lying down, like I am, bracing, but I'm a lot more relaxed. And I think that leans better into my coxing, because it's allowed me, I think, to develop my coxing into a more relaxed style. Because I definitely was a little bit more, let's go.
Yeah. Well, feeling the boat is like super important as a cox, because you need to like know what it's doing. You need to like, you can kind of feel the power curve as you sit in the boat. Some coxes like to wear shoes, some coxes like not to feel the action of the boat differently. What's the difference between being in a bow loader and like sitting in front of the stem? Do you feel the movement or the power application differently, or?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's better for your boat feel because you actually have to feel the boat and you have to know what's going on with your individual athletes as well and what they're working on, to be able to maybe call them out. And particularly, what's really useful for us, and I know it's not necessarily the same at all the clubs, is if you are outside of the boat at parts in the season, obviously in the winter, a lot of time outside the boat, I know what they're working on. The coach is telling me, or you need to be listening in so that, let's say you're feeling something and it's a little bit down on wherever, but you know that your 3-man's trying to work on getting a little more shape off the back turn. So you're like, okay, you've got to do a bit more trial and error. I think you've got to be like, okay, let's try and, let's tap down a little bit more off the back. And you're like, yeah, okay, that's made a change. And here's the feedback and stuff. Whereas I try, and I think the bad habits of a bow loader is you can end up just using all crew calls, because normally you're relying on what you can see and asking them to make technical changes, because it is harder to feel one person making a mistake. So that's where you've got to really dial in with the coach, whether that's when they're coaching live, or whether, it's off the water. And then with the feel, really you've got it through your feet and through your kind of bum and your lower back in an 8. And whereas I'd say for me, not really in the feet, like, because you kind of stretched out into the back. I'd say it's more like across my shoulders and my bum, basically, and what's in contact with the boat. But, for any coxers who are listening out there, don't ever jump in a 4 where you can't touch the end, because, put something down there. Like, I've got a very untechnical piece of foam that I created, which just looks like a comedy cheese wedge, which goes down the bottom of the boat. And then I'd also say don't lock out your legs, because then you lose that little bit of suspension and give. So I've got, again, those kind of like circular pieces of foam that you put on a bike when it's on a bike rack so it doesn't scratch something else or another bike. Just one of those underneath my knees. So I've got just a little bit of a break in my legs. So I've got a little bit of movement with the boat, and that helps. And that's helped me win 3 world championships and a games medal. So it doesn't need to be fancy, but make sure you can touch. You've got contact points with the boat.
That's really interesting points. Yeah, just a little shock absorber.
Yeah.
Just something that helps you from locking your legs out. Small things that like you just might never think about. Yeah.
That's some golden advice right there. I imagine like some people will go to their coach and be like, hey, can we get some foam and put that in the boat?
Yeah, I just found it in Morris's workshop. Sorry, Morris. It's like, it's mine now.
Oh, Morris is listening, so I'm pretty sure next week you'll be called over for a meeting.
Get told off.
He listens to some of them. I'm not sure he listens all the way.
Morris,
through.
if you want to make me a carbon fiber one, then I'll take it.
Lightweight. Cool. So I guess in like obviously stepping up into the boat race, still really enjoying that pressure, that extra part of it. Then so last year of uni. Then sort of moving forward, did you think you wanted to take it on? Did what you did next was based around that?
No, entirely accidental, to be honest. Yeah. So I was going to do a master's at Oxford, a procrastinator master's, to do another boat race and to take the boat race onto the Tideway. I was going to be the president. I've been elected as the president, but I just didn't have the money, basically, because I needed to get a certain mark to get the funding, and I did not get to that mark. I got enough to kind of get in and do it, but it would have been a lot. And I was doing an archaeology master's. I did history and English at uni, and it's so expensive. And it did get to a point where you're like, woohoo, this would be great. And then you're like, hang on a minute, it's just silly. You can't get a bank loan to go and do a boat race. It's silly. And I was a bit like, is this going to work? And I was like, do you know what? I'm just going to take a year, because I actually had a job to go to EY and go be in the city, because I panicked when I was in second year and did an internship and they gave me a job.
So that's an awesome job.
It would have been good, and I probably would have been living on the Fairmile right now, but probably wouldn't be rowing. So
was that with Lane 4, Greg Sells?
It wasn't with Lane 4. It was before the merger with Lane 4, because I'm old. But it was, I mean, to be honest, if I was working there, I'd be trying to push to work in Lane 4. But yeah, and so I had a year. I was actually still doing some stuff with OW because obviously they sort of had planned that I would still be there. So I was sort of helping some of their newer coxes. I did Four's Head with them in the Head of the Charles, which was amazing. But then obviously I needed to kind of pull back and find my own thing. And Morgan Williams, Morgan and I have literally bounced cross paths for years and years. And she basically was like, you should come to Leander. And
okay, so this is before Oxford. She did Brooks, but came to Leander.
Exactly. And she was here, and she was at that point sort of doing a bit of dabbling with...
What year?
So that would have been 2014-15 season.
Yeah. So we
were together, and and that was when she was basically doing some stuff with GB rowing team. Sort of this is obviously in the pre-Rio time with, against Zoe de Toledo, who's another WOX mentor. And so she sort of brought me down to Leander, which is obviously quite an unconventional time because obviously it was kind of just before Christmas. The start of the season, everyone's sort of like, why didn't you come at the start of the season? And I was thinking, I didn't even know. I don't know. I didn't know that this was happening. And
so that's why you appeared in the middle of the season.
I just turned up. But
what knowledge did you have of Leander? Had you kind of started geeking out on rowing yet, or not really?
I would say I'm still not. I'm not really rowing geek, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think this is the coming to it late sort of thing. So I think it was probably a good thing because I came in full naivety.
Yeah.
I had only been, I still maintain, I love Leander, but I would say I've never really been a club rower because Leander's not like, your club. It's different. We were talking about it literally before we press record about that.
Yeah.
You're there and all of a sudden you realise who you're coxing and who's there. And then I remember being in the changing rooms and Anna Watkins just came in. And I remember being like what? And that was when she was sort of trying to come back. And as classic Anna, is just lovely chatting to people. And, it was just sort of, that was when I started to be like, oh, okay. And I remember the first thing I did with Leander was, again, because Morgan I think she got taken out to a Viz. I jumped in and coxed the kind of ladies plate 8 against Oxford in a boat race fixture.
So that probably is when you coxed me then.
Yeah, and I remember I remember just thinking like flipping heck. And obviously I knew all the UBC boys. And they're like, what are you doing here? And then I was like, okay, there's a lot of people to impress here. Like my new club, my ex club, like, stressful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Stan Ludis was stroking the other 8 and I had Chris Boddy was stroking our one. And I just remember, I don't think we won any, but I think it was close, and I think it was closer than we expected. And I managed to bully their Cox out of the racing line, so I was happy.
What year was that? Was that the year that Trenton messed it all up?
No, that was 2012.
Oh yeah, no, that was it.
Yeah, a little bit earlier. Yeah.
Huh.
So I can't, because I remember that year. Yeah, we lost everything to Oxford, and we lost everything to Cambridge, and the other way around. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I put a lot of money on, and he cost me a lot of money. But no, I'm pretty sure. I say I can't specifically remember being coxed by you, but that rings bells.
Because that would have been 2015, early 2015, right? And at that point, you were still in retirement.
No, I came back.
You came back about March, April.
End of March. Yeah, maybe I wasn't in that boat.
I mean, it was incredibly confusing when you came back because also we had Tim Clark, Tom Ford, and then Tom Clark turns up and I'm like, oh my gosh. And to me also, they all look the same.
They're all just getting in the way of what I can see.
Yeah, I can't see anything.
Oh, that must be difficult as a cox. I always remember Chrissy used to wind me up in my Thames Cup year that everyone else was like a single name only, but I was always referred to as Tom Clark in the boat. And I was like, there's not even 2 Toms. I guess it was just her way. You just learn people's name. Like, that's how you do it.
Yeah, it was so funny. I used to, early doors when, you jump into new 8s, I always think it's good as a cox to use their names if you can. And, using pairs and 4s and things like that, but, backing things up with names. But like, I used to remember basically memorizing the crew list, so I could call them by their name in the boat, but I remember then we get out and I'm like, I've got no idea. So where you sat in the 3 seat? Great, then your name's Tom. Cool.
I just feel bad from a coach's point of view as well, because like you get like 60 new athletes at the start of the year, so the 8s go out like I'm doing numbers. I'm sorry, I'm doing numbers, but then they only learn your name. So then like 2 months later, everyone knows your name, and you're still like, I feel really bad now. Yeah. I don't know anyone's name. You still?
Yeah.
Who was in the two-set?
Yeah.
That's the saving grace in the boat, is that you can
using numbers.
You can use the numbers.
So that's a really funny situation that you found yourself in. Obviously, racing against your old club with your new club, surrounded by athletes who are, just pretty much GB development center, like you said, not a club rowing kind of club. And yeah, obviously, you learn so much from being in that atmosphere of having Olympians around you, people who go to world championships, everyone that's striving for excellence daily. It's nice to hear that also, like, Anna Watkins is like very supportive. We're in the process of like getting her onto the podcast as well.
Yeah.
That'll be cool to talk about. But how quickly would you say you managed to like settle into Leander? Because obviously it's very, very different to the Oxford College rowing system. It's almost like a completely different side of the sport.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was living at my mum and dad's, which is in Wantage. So I was driving, it's about 45 minutes away. Because, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had a job and I was traveling kind of all over the world. Basically, was supporting state school students getting into Oxford and Cambridge, but we kind of funded these programs by running international summer schools in Oxford and Cambridge for kind of more affluent families who wanted their kids to get the Oxbridge experience. So it was it was an amazing job because I basically got to go to these incredible countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, the States, Dubai, to these amazing schools, and then see the money going to state schools in the UK that really, really needed it. And Ernst & Young called me that like summer and was like, are you coming next year? You haven't signed your contract. I was like, I'm going to defer another year. And then I deferred another year. And I just really, really got into it. There was a really great group of women at Leander. I ended up I was with the ladies play 8 for kind of the initial bit, but then when kind of Morgan came back, I then kind of moved towards the women's side of the program, because this was actually, I think, the first year they had proper club women's 8. And we did kind of the summer racing. Yeah. So that was, Catherine Douglas, Fee Gammond,
Emily
Yasmin
Carmichael.
Trudell, Emily Carmichael, Emily Ashford, all people who
Pippa Whittaker.
Yeah, people who came up and kind of into the GB system in and around when I did, some people retired. And it was really great. It was a really great kind of soft launch, I think, into kind of that world, because, I was working with the ladies play 8, and that was a really big competitive group at that time. And then part of that development group. So it kind of, I basically moved into, of course, Upton Close for the summer.
There's nowhere else to live.
Oh, that's where if you haven't lived in Upton Close, are you a row? I moved into there in the summer, and then the Townsend, so Tasha Townsend, who had coached me at Oxford, and her husband, Sam Townsend, he was still rowing in the GB rowing team in the quad, and they were looking for a lodger. And we'd stayed really good mates with them kind of when I'd graduated, so I moved in with them up in Tokers Green, and it was lovely. It was so nice. And I think because I was similar age obviously to some of my fellow kind of women, but I kind of was at that point, because I was also taking a gap year, and then I'd taken that wasn't really a gap year, it was just the start of life after university. It felt like a gap year at the time. I was by then 24, 25, like I've been with my boyfriend since I was 17. He's now my husband, and like I wasn't that keen to kind of move into student digs sort of vibes, and so it was perfect. And the Townsends were amazing, and so I lived there for 3 years. Very briefly lived somewhere else before I kind of moved to Henley with my husband when we got married, and so it was ideal, really. I really, really enjoyed my time at Leander, and I sort of then did another season with them, and that's when I started kind of getting headhunted for GB stuff.
Yeah, that was a great time to join. That was the same year, so we joined Leander in the same year, and like I remember that ladies plate was lightning fast, and also like I totally forgot that was the first year that we had the proper women's 8. I
think it might still be the fastest Leander 8. We put down a time at met in obviously good conditions. You have to have some good conditions. I think we were like 29 or 5:31 or something. Might have been the fastest ever Leander. Maybe it's been beaten by now, but bunch, like you said, Tim Clark, Sam Arnott, Callum McBrighty, Chris Boddy, like just some big names.
Big lads. And they were everyone was just really lovely. Like I do just remember like the rosters, they were both around, I remember, I hadn't coxed men's 8s ever, really. I'd done a bit at college, but not kind of for longer periods. And that was really nice. And I think, I'd say there's a lot of there's a lot of stereotypes, a lot of, you know, easy questions that you haven't fallen into that you do get asked of like, oh, what was it like being a woman coxing a men's day and all that sort of thing. And I'm like, well, depends on the men, just as it does in the same way as what's it like working in this environment, or it depends on my colleagues. Like it's so flexible. But I do remember like going up to, one of the boys was living in Bix and we did a big Christmas party, and it was just like everyone cooked, there was just good fun. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of banter and a lot of messing around, but like it was really, really fun. I really did enjoy that.
I think it's like what you said, it's the common goal thing, isn't it? You know, we all are here, we're all pushing, we're all trying to make the best of ourselves, and it's just such a great environment to be in.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I probably miss most about rowing.
It's a breakfast club that you row around, really, isn't it?
Yeah, basically. Oh, I do miss the Leander breakfast from back then.
So good. I think we were there at the OG time of breakfast.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Hang on.
Tom's disagree.
I started in 07 when porridge was a penny.
Okay, right. Well, whatever.
Giant porridge was a penny. You used to get
penny.
Yeah, eggs were 5p, sausages and bacon were 10p each.
All right. Okay.
Toast was free, cereal was free, milk was free, tea and coffee was free.
But did you have 6 Polish chefs?
So there's a few,
yeah.
definitely.
There was 6 when I worked there.
Yeah. I mean, when I remember when I joined, and basically I would go and like, you know, you basically, for anyone who didn't know, like what you'd do is just like swipe your membership card and you would top it up and you could pick what you wanted and stuff. And then it would kind of get brought up to you. And I know, appreciate everyone's probably thinking, all right, yeah, very nice. And we get it. It was pretty rare. And I remember though, like you could get boiled eggs, but no one ever ordered boiled eggs because, you know, everyone's ordering bazillion calories of whatever. Well, see, I didn't need that. And I remember I ordered boiled eggs. And one of the kind of people came up and were like, oh, they don't really like to do boiled eggs basically because it's done to order and stuff. And I was like, oh, right, okay, yeah, no, and then just got scrambled eggs, whatever. And then when we went out to Rio, the chef went out with Debbie Flood and a couple of people I went out to watch in Rio, basically by accident, because I balloted for a load of tickets with a load of mates to go watch, you know, Sam T and Stan and Aludis was racing. And no one got anything, and I just got everything I balloted for. And so my husband and I were like, should we just go? And so we did, and it was amazing. But anyway, he came out as well to Rio, and we kind of all hung out a lot and became friends. And anyway, when I came back, he was maybe boiled eggs, and everyone was like, how did you get them? I was like, don't ask, you just got to be mates with the chef.
To give a little bit of context for those that know, so Leander Club is a rowing club, but it also is a fully functioning restaurant. So the reason why generally the athletes in certain forms over the years have access to cooked food is because basically there's this kitchen that's working for a restaurant already, and then sort of on the side they can help the athletes. It's like different versions, but yeah, it's still, I'm not saying it's not bougie, like it was amazing. Yeah. I think everyone understood it was amazing, but it's not just like a fully staffed kitchen for just athletes only. Yeah.
I mean, there is like a separate section for athletes. So I remember like sometimes we'd like make prep for breakfast the next day, and you just throw in 120 eggs into a massive bucket, 2 liters of double cream, mix it all together, and there you go, that's scrambled eggs for the next day. Like, that's so much food.
Yeah.
Yeah, big time.
Trays and trays and trays. And the desserts. Should I talk about sticky toffee pudding?
No, don't. I miss it.
Yeah, good. So good.
So you kind of briefly touched on, like you said, towards the end of that next sort of block of 2 or 3 years, you started getting picked up to be interested in you in 2017.
Yeah,
you had a little brief stint in the women's A.
Yeah, it was a bit nuts, to be honest. Like I basically got asked by Shep to kind of, they were starting doing a bit of a development program. It was, you know, it's now a lot more structured, but it was sort of what now would be, you know, they talked about Project Paris, getting ready for Tokyo, and now it's, I don't know, some sort of catchy name for LA. It's those athletes who are maybe beyond under 23s and or have maybe come back to their clubs for various reasons. Maybe they got injured at the wrong time and all of that, and weren't necessarily going to go to the games, but obviously really competitive, really good athletes. And so they put together, you know, it's the start of the project really with a women's head 8. And I got asked to cox that, and to be honest, it really came out of nowhere for me. I was like, oh, okay. It basically became sort of me and then Matilda Horn, who obviously ended up being part of the women's program and taking those women's 8 to the Olympics. We basically kind of shared that 8 throughout the summer. And that was kind of my first like, okay, this is interesting. Like maybe this is kind of a career path that could work for me. Ernst & Young called me again to see why I hadn't turned up at work yet. And I basically was like, I'm not coming. I was sort of like, got to that point where I'm like, oh, this is, something I really want to pursue and stuff. So basically after Rio, I was the spare for the Paralympics. Matilda was spare for the Olympic Women's 8, and we both basically got invited into Caversham after Rio. And what then ensued was probably the hardest 10 months of trialing of my entire life. And Matilda, another WOX mentor, she would agree, because we trialed for that whole summer, the whole time, both of us in every day. And I think, again, some of the lessons learned from the boat race and, from Morgan basically invited me into Leander as a direct competitor, being like, you should come to this club. It's really good.
Morgan's not scared.
Exactly. But like, we shouldn't be. And this is why, why I want coxes to kind of do more, rather than being like, oh, maybe you should try up Thames. It's bringing people in. And so Matilda and I just worked really, really well together. And I think we both really kind of, we brought really different things to the table, to be honest. So I was in the Women's 8 program, so I coxed them at the European Championships. We came fourth, which was very frustrating. And then at Henley, where we lost to the Kiwis by two-thirds of a length, but it was the closest we got to the Kiwis all year. So it was a win but a loss because it's Henley. And then she coxed them at the 2 World Cups. And it was really tight. And basically I didn't get the boat, and it was really tough. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I look back and think that Matilda was the best cox for that boat. I think that we both brought really, really different things. She was really technical, is very calm, very she's just really clear, really concise, and it was kind of quite a fizzy boat of personalities, and she really was the sort of antidote to that in a really positive way. And so I actually, whilst it was absolutely devastating when you don't get the crew, and then you think, what now? I do think she was the right person for the boat. And so, that was, probably like the toughest time I'd had in rowing was basically after that summer of 2017. They went to the World Champs. I think they came 4th or 5th, but literally like all top 5 boats in the Women's A final was all within half a length or something, and it was it was such a great race. And it's really hard as a cox then. Like Matilda and I were both fighting over an empty seat because Zoe de Toledo had retired. And then we're going into the next season, and by this point the weight for coxes had been neutralized by FISA. So basically you could cox men, cox women, you could swap basically the opposite genders, but also it was just 55 kilos across the board.
What was it before?
50.
Okay.
Yeah. And so
50 for women, 55
for men, but it made it 55 across the board. And then that also sort of meant that into year 2 of the cycle, Morgan had kind of taken a bit of a step back after she hadn't made the Rio boat, and 55 kilos, because Morgan had kind of found sometimes making weight just a little bit detrimental to her health. That brought her back into the mix. And so all of a sudden you've got a situation where Morgan's an unknown, but on paper, Matilda's beating me. So I'm looking at being like, well, if I was GB rowing, right, I'd be trialing Morgan against Matilda, and then I'm out of the picture. And well, that sucks. That's logical, and like, where does this leave me? Yeah. And the tough thing about, selection in the early of the Olympics is you're looking, being like, okay, that's quite a long time to wait, and what am I going to do? And that was when
especially as a cox, because there's
nowhere else.
There's no second boat.
That's what I said. It's a really shallow pyramid. And so, I was kind of considering my options and thinking about the para squad, but it was very much in my own head. I haven't really talked to many people about it, and just wondering whether that might be an option for me to trial. But they just won the World Championships by like 17 seconds.
Who had been coxing there in the post?
So Rio? In the Rio era, it was a guy called Ollie, and then a girl called Anna Corduroy had come into the boat. But the boat had been formed relatively late in the season, so it wasn't kind of like a really long trialling process. And I was sort of like I don't know, are they going to be like, well, they ain't broke? You know, like, why do we need to trial? This person's an incumbent world champion. And I bumped into Foxy, James Fox, in Sainsbury's in Henley. And I said, look, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And he was like, absolutely. Like, you know, the trialling is still open, as it was still open in the women's squad, but I'd sort of been through it, you know? So, yeah, I was like, oh, I'm not sure. And then, yeah, their coach called me a couple of days later being like, why haven't you emailed me yet?
Was that Tom or
Nick? Yeah. And so...
You didn't work with Tom Dyson?
I did. And I went to basically have a meeting actually with Nick and Tom very early days when I was going to trial. And they basically kind of had a bit of a chat, found a bit about me. And they said very bluntly, you know, essentially, if the women's squad turn around and say, oh, we made a mistake, or this person's ill, we want you to jump in, would you do it? And I was like, no, because I was sort of like, I'm a very loyal person. And I was a bit like, I'm not gonna step away, because I think the para squad, not now at all, but maybe a little while back, might have been seen as the sort of second best, or you know, a backup and stuff. And you know, for me, it's never been the backup of my career. It's been the making of my career.
Yeah.
And it's a squad that I'm really proud to be a part of. And so, yeah, it was kind of fair play to them for having that conversation with me, and I'm pretty sure they did it with everyone else who was interested in trialing.
Yeah, they wanted to see commitment. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you want people who are passionate about it, not someone who's like, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, this is a backup.
Absolutely, you don't want that entire competition to be used as a development.
Totally.
Is it?
Yeah, and then lose them when they decide they want to do something else. Yeah, no, I went to the same school as Tom Dyson. He's obviously his last year was my first year of rowing.
Yeah,
but we had the same rowing coach. So
okay.
Generally every year at Henley, that rowing coach will come down on like the Wednesday or Thursday, and we'll go out for dinner. So for quite a few dinners with Tom Dyson, which was really funny when he was coaching the Paralympic team and I was rowing in the GB team.
Yeah,
I was like getting like some inside knowledge from one of the coaches.
Really like? Tom Dyson is
shout out. Yeah.
Oh, what? He's another kind of coach who's been, I'd say, like really formative in my career, but also sort of like the way that I want to operate in a high performance environment. He is unbelievably fair. He is really considered, and so he was the chief coach of the para squad. He never kind of directly coached me on the regular basis as my crew coach, but obviously I experienced his coaching loads, and his leadership all the way through. You know, COVID was rough, was really, really hard, and he got us all not just to the start line healthy, but, you know, became the top rowing nation there as well. And he's now basically moved up to be the Paralympic performance director, and he works very much kind of alongside Louise, the performance director for kind of the whole Olympic and Paralympic program. And I'm really glad, because, you know, I would have hated to lose him to another sport, let alone another nation.
Yeah, I saw him last year when that rowing coach actually retired. We met up, we went for a little road back down at our school, and I said, "Oh, you know, how's it going?" And he was like, "Well, it was billed as a 9 to 5. It is not a 9 to 5."
I mean, Tom is one of the hardest workers. So you could give him like a factory job that was 9 to 5, and he'd be taking bits home to go and work on it in his own time. He can't let anything go. So he works hard.
Cool. Yeah. So then 2018, obviously you then trial and get selected, fall on the right side. Difficult, long.
Yeah, we basically trialed the whole year pretty much again. Very different vibe when you are trialing for a seat that is filled directly against someone else, you know, who is, you know, you're literally trying to unseat them. Whereas, you know, Matilda and I, or Elise, were trying to trial for a seat that was empty. And then Harry Brightmore trialed in my season as well, along with some other people. Sasha was going to trial for a bit as well. Another Wax mentor. We've all crossed our paths.
There's a common theme here.
Yeah, I know.
High performance.
So basically it ended up being by the kind of new year, they kind of narrowed it down to myself and the incumbent to basically trial for the seat. And yeah, it was a lot of pressure. I was also kind of aware, this was sort of my last chance saloon sort of thing. If I wanted to kind of compete for GB, I basically had gone back to Leander for a couple of months, sort of before proper trialing with the para squad, and whilst it was great, it was, I'd had a taste of that kind of GB lifestyle and what the opportunities that were there, and I was kind of, I think, although I hadn't kind of, set it in stone, if I hadn't got the para seat, I think, it probably would have been the end of my high level competitive career. Probably would have finished off the season, but I think that the best athletes, and this is from, every stage through to the top level, have something else in their life going on. I think you need context, and that can be your work, that can be a hobby, that can be whatever, because I think that provides light and shade to everything you do. All you do is row, and all you care about is rowing. When you have a bad day, it'll be really, really dark, and the context of your really bad day might just be an actual not that great 30 minutes, like not a great 30-minute test.
Or 10 strokes.
Exactly. And like you can really dwell where you have other things going on. And
perspective.
Exactly. And so for me, I think, having something else and I don't know what I would have got on to do, but like I loved studying. I love history.
Yeah.
If I hadn't done that, basically I wouldn't have necessarily stayed in rowing and done what would have been obviously a 5-year cycle. Who knew?
Yeah.
To kind of wait for the next games to maybe get in, but maybe not. Like same could happen again.
Absolutely. If you let it, you can get so lost in the sport. So having something else going on that kind of like also marks the timeline is really important. So now that you've been selected for the Paralympic squad, how would you say the training was different from full-time rowing at Leander, obviously, then to training at Paralympics? Like, do they follow a similar structured program? Maybe they do more on the water stuff, less of the... I have no idea how it works.
Well, I would say, you probably look at a para training program and you could literally copy it and do it at Leander and probably go and do really well at Henley. Like, it literally looks exactly the same. I'd say the biggest difference is, so basically I'll kind of break down para rowing a little bit for people who might not know. There's basically 3 classifications. There's PR, para rowing, 1, 2, and 3. And the easiest way to think about it is basically what body parts you are using. So PR1, which is kind of our highest level of disability, you're essentially using your arms, and you've got you can kind of use your lats and traps and the top of your back, but you've generally got you will be using a wheelchair almost always, but you basically have massively impaired hip function to no function at all, and essentially it's just, and you're in a seat, and that's where you'll see the floats.
Pretty strapped in from
here, yeah, strapping it kind of across the chest, and that's where you'll see the floats on either side as well. And then you've got PR2, so that's always a single. PR2 is the international boat class at the games is a double, and it's a mixed double, so one guy, one girl, and they've got hip function. So you may see some of the athletes in wheelchairs, but some might also walk and be kind of double leg amputees or something like that. And then you've got PR3, and that's probably the widest kind of catchment field, but fundamentally we row in a normal non-modified boat, and you use your legs, trunk, hips and arms. So you kind of have, in general speaking, quite a low level of disability. They're the sort, you probably walk past people in the street, probably wouldn't really necessarily know that they have a disability. So that's visual impairment, might have kind of mild cerebral palsy. One of the girls in the squad, it's generally kind of foot and ankle. So Foxy had fused ankles. G was in a car accident and kind of lost half of her foot when she was doing it. So it's basically, if you saw us rowing and training along, you'd think, oh, mixed boat, that's random. But you wouldn't probably have much more of an awareness.
Yeah.
So our training program is very, very similar. Our PR3 athletes, you can row at the games in a Cox 4, or actually now, very excitingly, there's a mixed double as well that you can compete in. So we've got an extra boat. But generally speaking, our training program is very similar. I'd say kind of the only thing that you probably notice is our mileage is probably a little bit less on average. So, our long sessions, we're talking 14, 16 Ks rather than the 20, 24 Ks of a senior program. But, weights is the same, ergo's the same. The only thing is we don't do 30-minute tests, partly because of kind of the physiological strain that puts under particularly athletes who are if they're erging and they're having to be kind of strapped in ergos and things like that. So instead we do kind of in the GB team kind of an alternative test, which is sort of replicates the 30 minutes. It's a similar kind of strenuous, not fun thing to do.
I was going to say, you don't do half hour, 30-minute RAID 20 because you like your backs.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to protect those. So, but like the training plan is really similar. So, the other thing that the para squad do, which is a GBRT thing, not necessarily anything else, but we tend to have Thursdays as cross-training days, which is just the opportunity to go do other things. That might be swimming, cycling. You still need to train, but it gives you a bit of freedom and flexibility. I'm not gonna lie, it's great as a Cox because it gives me a little day in the day. We're filming today on a Thursday because I have a lot more flexibility, so that's actually really nice for me as well. But I often go with the athletes if they're going climbing or we're going doing something else because it just breaks things up, and I think that's something that's quite good as well.
Yeah, it's cool. Caversham can get very samey.
So that's and 2K leg is just like same old. So
a lot of spinning.
Yeah.
I've always found a sort of the fascination, I guess, for being involved in para rowing is in rowing. As a coach, you have all your athletes' bodies working exactly the same way. Your bodies all work like this, and we're going to row like this. Whereas when you bring in the extra level of difficulty to come and say, like, all of your bodies do something quite different here, but we all want to try and do the same thing. And it's like, how do we work that out? How do we make this person do that? And they're not the same disabilities at all either as well. So I mean, what's that like? Is that just stressful but fun but rewarding and a bit of everything all at the same time?
I don't think you find it particularly stressful, but I think that's partly because I'm just so used to it now. But I think for me, it keeps me on my toes.
Yeah.
I think the biggest kind of concern I have with the Cox generally, particularly, I've been in the system for a long time, is they don't become stale. Just saying the same thing and people aren't really listening anymore and all of that. And I don't think it's quite hard to become stale when you've got kind of new athletes with new impairments and I would say I'm a rigging master because you've got to figure out, you not only got a mixed crew, so you need to basically, how are we setting up blades and spans and inboards and all of the sort of things, so you're not taking on all loads of load and you're just not washing out early, and how are we kind of figuring that out? And then you've got inside the boat itself, every setup is really, really individualized because fundamentally someone with fused ankle can't just turn up and jump in a boat. If you actually look at any images or videos of us rowing in the combination that ended up rowing in Tokyo, you would be kind of forgiven for thinking Foxy is 7'5" because he has fused ankles. So he used to row on a plus, sometimes 15, but most often 20 seat with 3 seat pads. And so if you imagine then, how do you possibly find height for him? So he's basically, we needed loads more seat to feet height.
Yeah.
You needed his heels to be as far down as him to be as high up as possible. But then obviously, how do you make the rigger work for you? So there were chocks under his rigger that lifted his rigger up so we can create more height. And then he had basically an unbelievably kind of shallowed off foot plate. And then we put extra layers of carbon fiber at the bottom of the boat because you can imagine basically his heel is dinking on the bottom of a boat, a lovely little new carbon fiber boat. We're like, you're not going to basically, you just push a hole into it. So all these sorts of things, you've got to be really on it. So put it this way, seat racing is pain in the butt. Changing these setups within, a fixed period of time. So we've got the fairness and things like that. It's
like all hands on deck.
Yeah, but also like all hands on deck that I trust to do it right.
Yeah.
I was going to make a joke about seat racing, but no, you actually do have a time constraint. And oh wow, okay.
Yeah. So it's one of those, and so that's where I think it's great, and that's why I think particularly with PR3 athletes where there is absolutely no reason why PR3 athletes shouldn't be rowing in clubs, and it be made possible for them to do so. And I think that's definitely something that, big shout out, I would say Molesey and Agecroft are kind of leading in the clubs at the moment for having, in particular, PR3 athletes, but you've got Maidenhead, who've also got some PR3 athletes, but also some PR2s and PR1s, and Marlow as well, who are basically just facilitating rowers from all disabilities. And I think it's really, really important. There are some fundamental things and access needs that you do need if you are PR2 and PR1.
Yeah.
Particularly, it's a real challenge for them to run the tideway, for example, because it's tidal. You need to be able to access a dock. There's no kind of getting into the boat and stuff in Putney, for example.
No way in, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of those considerations, but it's completely doable. It's just kind of just opening their minds a little bit more, because fundamentally, I think, I'm kind of using Ben Pritchard, who's our PR1 athlete's kind of example, is he loves rowing as a wheelchair user. He used to be a semi-pro cyclist and had an accident whilst in a race. And he loves rowing because as a wheelchair user, a lot of parasport, you do it in a modified wheelchair. Whereas for him, he leaves his wheelchair on the dock and just rows off. And it's really freeing. It's something that's really different.
Yeah.
And I do think that's kind of a real draw to our sport for people who are particularly in wheelchairs, who can go out and do it. So I do think it's really cool.
I also think that's actually a major benefit if you're a PR1 rower, is that you don't have to row on the tideway.
To be fair, yeah.
I can just hear them now. Oh no!
What a nightmare! We'll row on the Thames.
Yeah, but it's stuff that you don't even think about. Like, it's, when you're walking through a city and you see a set of stairs and there's no ramp or anything, like, sometimes it takes a second to catch yourself and be like, how do people in a wheelchair get up there? And then you see, okay, there's a lot more accessibility being provided, and I think that's really important, because if we have more competition, the standard's going to improve, right? And these people will still love to enjoy the sport. Like, I think I obviously have no experience in this, but like if I was disabled, like, I think I would have to do something. So like, I think it's amazing that that these people like have access to sport and to kind of like be able to express their competitive spirit and also like share passion with others in similar scenario.
Yeah, totally. And I think as a Paralympic program, talking about Tom Dyson, he basically has been at the helm of the program, and now is kind of his performance director level. It's the GB setup is unmatched by anyone else, and definitely is a massive reason behind our success. I'd say what's really exciting and a bit scary is the rest of the world are catching up and moving on, and it's really interesting because almost watching at our sport and the way it's developed over the last 10-15 years, and the rest of the world catching up is very much almost like when funding first came in for the Olympic rowing program, and now everyone else is also doing the same, and I think it's really exciting. And I think as a Paralympic program, we really, really benefit from the fact that we share Caversham with the Olympic program.
Yeah.
And I would say it is a really reciprocal relationship. Like we do share things and vice versa, and we share resources and coaches and all those sorts of things. And I think that does really help. And and I think definitely again over the last couple of cycles is the kind of, I think, respect for the para squad and what we do and what we've achieved. Particularly, I think there's no hiding the fact that GB had a bit of a fallow period after the amazing successes of London and Rio, and there was some amazing athletes and amazing performances, but still it wasn't potentially kind of the gold rush era that we'd had in previous cycles. But all credit to kind of Tom Dyson and Nick and stuff, because the para 4 was kind of consistently still winning those gold medals. So I think there was an element of, that's amazing that we're still doing that, and we're not doing things wrong. We've just, Louise actually said it relatively recently, but obviously generally speaking, and this is the same in any sport in any nation, almost the more success you have, sometimes the bigger your retention problem is after a major competition, because people are happier to move on than if they're like, so close. I'll give it one more go. And so I think we really benefit as a Paralympic program, and we're kind of we recognize that, and also as a sport as well. We have the same world champs, the same European champs, all those sorts of things. It brings more eyes on the sport.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I think it's really good. And some people can say, oh, you've got more than everyone else. It's like, but someone's got to lead the way, and if we want to push this sport on, we want to make it more professional, then, like, kudos to GB Rowing for doing those things, for keeping it together. And I think, you know, I love what Hugo said after Brooks's massive Henley. It was like, it's not our fault, we're fast. Like, it's up to you to catch up now. Like, at the end of the day,
and I think
it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's being, you know, I'm relatively unapologetic about it. And you know, you love the little media stuff you do straight off the pontoon, and they're like, doesn't get boring winning. You're like, no, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't. Like, that's what we go out to do when we train. We don't train like world champions, I would say, you know, as in we train like, you know, we're silver medalists and pushing to be world champions.
I love that.
You don't, you kind of, you once you kind of finish that season, it is a bit of a slate clean and everyone comes in and everyone grafts, because that's the only reason that we end up being successful. And you know, don't get me wrong, we've had some close calls. And like 2018, sorry, my first world championships was, that was pretty tight, and two of our top athletes had surgery that year, so we're out. And then I would say the world championships this year, you know, just couldn't shake America quite off our tails. And I think, you know, going into next season, I think we all know, like, we've got to train really, really hard to make sure that we're at the top of the podium.
One thing I've always been impressed by, something I've always said in rowing, is that no one's ever broken a world record without being pushed. You know, no one's ever broken a world record without having a boat 3 feet behind them. Oh, actually, like, there is a boat that's done it, and it's the British Para4. And to be able to be breaking records whilst not being pushed is a different level of mental toughness. And I think that's something that's, I don't know whether it's unfair to say or fair to just say that's probably woken a few rowers up to the fact. I think I'm not the only one that's noticed that. We're like, okay, like, that's flipping impressive. Yeah, there might not be as much competition, or you might be ahead at the moment off the curve. But okay, if you're going out and breaking world records, then, you know, that's impressive.
Yeah, and it makes it easy to start training, I'd say. And I think where parasport is interesting is, you know, we're talking about that development pathway, which I kind of did, obviously some of it. You know, I didn't necessarily do the kind of under 23 route. Whereas in parasport, that progression is a lot faster. And so you've got some really young athletes who've got to put their big pants on and basically just turn up to train with world champions and Paralympic champions and be part of a kind of a legacy sport. And what I really enjoy is, you know, I've rowed in lots of different combinations of fours in my time on the program. And every time, you know, we do win something or we push something or we get a world best time or whatever, you know, it's not just like you're looking at the legacy thinking, oh my gosh, like, let's not drop the ball. Like, no, you'll become a part of that. And it's, you know, it's a really, really cool culture, I think. It makes it easy to turn up to training, because I think everyone, I think, you know, the more years we go unbeaten, I think the heavier the burden.
Yeah.
And the fundamental fact is we will lose. At some point, we will lose. I'd love to not be in it when that happens. I'm not going to lie, but I might be. You never know. But I think, well, ask me again after I've lost. But like, if we have prepped our best, trained our best, raced our best, and we get outclassed by someone else, I think I'd hopefully be at a point where I could be like, yeah, fair play, actually, because I know how hard our lot train.
Absolutely. You know how much it takes in order to like get that. So if someone can put out a better performance than this, all right, fine.
Process driven, not outcome driven. And that's how you can kind of keep on top of your performance. And again, like, in the absence of, you know, if you get to have a humdinger with a crew through the whole World Cup series, okay, we were half a length faster, or we were a length faster and we changed this, and there's a lot of other crews out there just measuring themselves off what other people are doing. Like, you guys have just got to be all in, heads in, like, what are we doing, what are we feeling? There's not going to be not every time there's going to be someone to be like, oh yeah, we were there. I guess also with para rowing, maybe like consistency is a little bit different as well, because you're dealing with so many other problems. Like, you look at like in a you know, what, men's 8 or whatever, you know, quite a lot of those speeds were very, very consistent. So if you gain half a length on the crew, you can kind of attribute, oh yeah, we did this. Whereas you guys, like you said, like, sometimes you'll have a humdinger, another time you might win by a really big margin.
Yeah, and I also think you've got kind of those external things going on, and then you've also got what's going on inside the boat as well. And I think, you know, we talked about with different people's impairments and impacting things in different ways. Like G, for example, I said she kind of had a problem with her foot. Like, that actually was quite challenging in and around Tokyo. because she just had to manage it all the time. If she was walking too much, it would have an impact. And I'd say like people's external lives and things that are just going on with their own bodies have potentially a greater impact on the way that we train, or like Ed, for example, who's our stroke man at the moment. He's a hemophiliac, but essentially when he was younger, he had a lot of bleeds internally and kind of ended up with kind of problems with his ankles. So essentially travel days are really tough for Ed because you're just on your feet all the time.
Yeah.
And let's say we have a travel day and a delay, because, you know, flights right now, don't think anyone's had an easy kind of run. So you get out to a training camp or a competition where the turnaround's got to be pretty quick. It's kind of like, okay, well, we need to be aware that Ed's ankles are actually really sore. So we've got to modify that first session, you know, and should we cut that mileage down, and all those sorts of things in a way that the senior program probably doesn't need to individualize and think about it that much.
Yeah.
And also, I think the challenge is, as well, is our lack of spares. You know, we don't have that.
I was going to ask you, so like during a normal season, for example, like let's take the example of the lead up to Tokyo. Like how many athletes were you working with in sort of like in your group for obviously 4 seats?
Yeah, I mean, really pretty much the crew was fairly set through the 2019 season seat racing that we did. And once that crew was kind of set for that World Championships, we did do some seat racing, I believe in kind of the 2019-20 season before we went into the pandemic. But generally, going into the pandemic, the general kind of conversation we had with kind of the selection panel and stuff was essentially that kind of our selection still stood, provided, you know, we demonstrated continuous improvement and things like that. But generally, we had probably in that kind of World Champs crew and the people who race, there was basically one additional woman and one additional man. So it was very tight and intense. I'd say now there's been some great work done through our development pathways and talent ID and things like that. So we're looking at this season, which is kind of odd because obviously it's year 3 of the cycle, but it's also games year.
Yeah.
Where year 3 of the cycle, I'd say generally, historically in the para squad, that's where potentially kind of a lot of the trialing and selection was done. And whilst there might be a couple of challenges in games year, it was sort of a bit more set. Whereas we are in games year and year 3. Yeah. So there is quite a lot of trialing to be done this year, which is quite new for our squad. So I think, you know, to some extent, this is exactly what it's like in the Olympic program. And so, you know, this is a great show of more athletes and stuff like that. But I think it's more intense to some extent than the Olympic program, because if you are a male stroke sider who can only row in stroke side because of your impairment, you know exactly there is one seat for you and that's the guy you got to beat. It's very, very intense. And I think, you know, it is a credit to the athletes in the team in the way that we all work together. And I hope, you know, that will still be the case in 6 months' time when, you know, selection may well be done and some people are going to the games and some people aren't, because it's brutal, you know, Olympic year selection. And I mean, it's similar, I guess, for like, let's say the scullers on the men's and the women's sides at the moment in the Olympic program, where there's however many scullers and there's 4 seats. But the difference is, in theory, they could sit in any seat, whereas your, you know, bow sider on who's a woman can only sit in one. Yeah,
you're not constrained to literally a particular seat.
It's a 4, but not 4. Yeah. It's interesting. There's still only one seat for you in it. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about the Tokyo Paralympic Games. Coming out of the pandemic, how was that for your squad and how did you approach the competition? Were you excited? What was that like? Did it meet your expectations?
I mean, Tokyo was the more nuts, like the more you just have time away from it, you're like, that was mad. That was like it was like a novel, wasn't it? Like the whole pandemic was like dystopian
very
fiction.
Much.
And I would say, you know, so we, as I said, we probably had a better pandemic than I would say maybe the Olympic squad, partly because we were probably a little bit more secure in our seats. The Olympic squad, you know, had a much tougher run of it because they were literally seat racing until everything got shut down and then the kind of selection was obviously kind of revoked. It was all very stressful, whereas for us it was definitely a little bit gentler. And unsurprisingly, kind of, I think it was really, really well run by our coaches. We all had equipment at home. The general vibe was there was like a coffee morning 8 till 8:30 on Zoom. You could just jump on and say hi. There was no agenda. We had a meeting once a week at that time in the morning. And then we had a program. Generally speaking, it was like kind of 2 sessions a day, with flexibility around what that actually looked like. And then we trained together doing kind of pieces on Wednesdays and Saturdays on Zoom. All the coaches trained as well. I trained with them. Like, it was just a bit of a camaraderie. And actually, I've got to credit kind of Lauren Rolls mostly for this, is that we then started basically picking up waifs and strays from other sports, who were maybe training on their own. And we were like, we're doing this session if you want to join. Like my dad joined for one of them. Nice. And like, you could see all the screens. He had like Alice Ty, who's a very successful Paralympic swimmer, joined. We got her into erging. Baroness Tanya Gray Thompson joined us for a few. Like, it was pretty nuts. Like, it was really, really cool. So that kind of kept that, community going. Yeah. And then we basically kind of hit the games season, and it was really odd because understandably you had men's squad, women's squad, para squad, and we all sort of bubbled from each other. So we actually, for the whole of that year, were very isolated in our own groups. We even ate in different places, in Caversham, there was like a marquee, like we all rotated through because obviously no one wanted to be in the marquee. Yeah. And it was very surreal year. Lots of, again, it was really early on in COVID, you're a close contact, you're just home for 10 days, so back to that home training vibe and stuff. And so basically to get to the games was a massive relief. And then you PCR tested so much. Like, we also, because basically restrictions upped themselves in Italy, the senior squads managed to get away for an international work camp right before the games. But because we were going like 3 weeks later, by then Italy wouldn't let us in. So we ended up basically living in the Medeski Stadium Hotel for 5 weeks.
So you didn't under 23 camp before Paralympics, basically.
Oh, it was quite bleak. And then we just literally all we did was spend time with each other. Thankfully, we had our own rooms. Otherwise, it would have gone nuts. I brought my sewing machine. I did loads of sewing products. I created loads of stuff. Like, everyone just did what they needed to do. Yeah. There were like switch tournaments. Our coaches famously drank a lot of Monster, and so we created like a blind Monster like taste test competition. They were buzzing like the rest of the day. And then obviously it's really surreal for the Paralympics because the Olympics is on at the same time. So we're doing our work camp, watching our peers at the Olympics. And so that was really weird because we basically set up one of the rooms in Caversham. We got like bean bags. Ben is our like coffee connoisseur, so he brought in his super fancy coffee machine. And so we'd kind of do our first session. When the rowing was on, it was sort of like, you're cool if you wanted to see what the result was, but the rule was you couldn't tell anyone. Yeah. So if you wanted to get up and watch it, you could, or you could just check on the results in the morning. But then we would, like, when the rowing was on, obviously it's on for like 8 days or whatever, we'd do our first session, then we'd come in and have our breakfast and watch rowing, which was weird. Like, you wanted to watch, but it was also like, I feel sick. This is where we're going to be and stuff. So it was bizarre. And then the games themselves were like everything you expected to be and nothing like you could possibly imagine, because it's the size of it, I think I couldn't really get my head around. And also, you're seeing people but you don't know because you just follow them on Instagram and like, famous faces and stuff. And then, surreal because there was just this beautiful stadium, which was empty. And I consider us quite lucky as rowers because you never start with a crowd. You always start in silence and it's just you. And by the time you would hit the crowd, there's ringing in your ears anyway. Like, you're not thinking about it. The time when it's weird is, the national anthem and obviously, all going well and you're just looking up and there's like 5 people and your coach will be like, yay, with a flag. And so that's where it was really odd. But I think the most stressful bit of it was essentially you did a PCR test every day. And, if you didn't hear anything, you were good news. But generally, like, we handed in our PCR tests about 5 a.m. or whatever when we were going down to the course. and you'd normally hear by noon. And so I remember the day before we got to the afternoon and we knew that we were racing at like 11:24 or something. And so even if we did test positive tomorrow, we were just too late. We would have won by then.
Nice.
So we almost like the day before, you sort of allow yourself to like think, okay, we're going to race the final, because you could never relax. Every day that went past, every week went past, that was good. But pretty much like Anne had said to us, the team doctor, if you catch COVID kind of beyond May, you probably won't be going to the games because of the risk of you testing positive.
Yeah.
Not basically getting that negative test, or, the Japanese were using a lot more advanced PCR tests and things like that. And you could basically put your whole team at risk. So
As if the stress of the games was not enough.
I know. So yeah, gratitude was probably the overriding emotion. And then it was just so weird because also there's all the unglamorous parts of the games that no one talks about. Like the fact that...
Go on.
So if you look at old pictures of people on podiums, rowers specifically, that are wearing lycras, but if you'd notice from Rio, they are all in Team GB Paralympic Street tracksuits, because they sort of... I don't know at what point someone was like, why aren't the rowers doing this? Like the swimmers have got to get changed, and so you have to get into your tracksuits. But context, you land, you finish, and then they're like, and you're like hugging, celebrating, you just won, and they're like, go, you need to get changed, and then they like put you in this little tent of, this is what it was like in Tokyo. Bear in mind, it's like 38 degrees and really humid, and like with then your other competitors who are, silver and bronze, you're like, oh, hi, well done, and someone's not as happy, someone is happy, you're like, it's all really weird. And then you're all in this like teeny tiny confinement, and then you don't take your lycra off or anything. You're just pulling your lycra up over your like sweaty lycra, and then you've got like your top and your thing and sorting everyone out. Foxy was like, I think I'm gonna faint like this, and then there was like, sit down and drink this water, and obviously then you need to make sure it's a sealed water, and beware from like UCAD and drugs testing. So, and then I'm literally like, you're getting on that podium, like you're not missing from this picture, like. It was just so weird. It was so like rushed. And then, so you have this picture and it all looks really nice, but underneath everyone's in this like horrendous, like sweaty kit. Yeah. And then you have to de-rig your boat. And, it's the end of a race, right? Like you've still got to de-rig your boat, put it in the container. And
you're like, no, I'm a champion now.
I know.
Where's the person to do this
and
for
you've
me?
done all your interviews, and then they're like, cool, well, can you get the boat bags? And so it's not like a bad thing, sweep the sheds, all of that sort of thing. But it's really, because also you didn't have any friends or family to go and celebrate with. It was just each other. So it was mad. And then we flew home the next day, which was just surreal.
So you weren't able to like experience other sports or make friends with like people from other disciplines and stuff like that?
No, because of the pandemic, you just needed to kind of get out and go. So we Uber Eats some beers and sake into the village, and then the coach had all bought everyone some champagne, so we had some champagne like in our flat basically with our coach. And then we've been playing this game that I brought along called the Mind. It's not that complicated, and so then we obviously played like the Drinking Mind, which was fun. But like also bear in mind, you're in the village. Normally you go out and celebrate, but someone downstairs or above or whatever might be having their final tomorrow, so it's not a raucous party. And then also you had to pack. So it was also like, you don't want to pack the day before your final, or the day, well, we weren't going to do the day off because it was so early, but it feels weird. You're here for this big thing, but you're already getting ready to leave. So some people did pack, some people left it all till later. And then, we flew home the next day. And what was really weird is we landed back in the UK and we'd been full, like masked, gloved, everything, like so COVID compliant. And then you get back to the UK, and by then, basically, everyone had been like, yeah, we're over it now. Yeah. And so at the airport, all our family and friends were there. It was amazing, but it was really weird. Like, I ran and hugged my husband, and I hadn't seen him for nearly 3 months. But even that, like, not masked, hadn't hugged people, like, it felt alien, felt really weird.
But you weren't wearing the hazmat suit off the airport, no?
No, but it was weird, like seeing people's faces. Like we basically, in the village, you had to be masked up 100% of the time. Even when we were rowing, when you're outside, Like basically when we rode, we had to push off in masks and then we were allowed to take them off.
That's a good point. Little sidetrack here, but like I was working in an office and then we had some new hires during COVID, and then basically we had to like wear masks for like 8 or 9 months after, and then people started taking their masks off for the first time. We were like, wow, I've never seen your face.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I've spent a lot of time in a hospital recently, and I only saw my oncologist's actual face recently because the hospital, within the last like 2 months, have changed their rules on face masks. Oh. And I was like, that's what your chin looks like. You look different. Yeah.
So obviously, two world championships and a Paralympic medal. Like some easier than others. The decision to keep going, was some of that to do with the fact that maybe Tokyo wasn't all of the games that it could have been or should have been?
Yeah, maybe. But to be honest, it was an easy choice. It wasn't really a consideration that I wanted to retire. I find like, and I appreciate this, that I'm coming from the Cox's perspective, where I am not doing all the training. I would like to caveat with the fact that I do all the land training that my athletes do.
Good.
We see a bit of it on Instagram. Yeah, it's good.
I do all the land training, not on a nerve, but I do it. and you know, I'm obviously cycling when they're on the water, so I don't have all the full fatigue. But it is the kind of concept of like, you know, you kind of complete something and you win something. Like imagine in the real world in like a business, and you go and you're working really hard to get that client or get that win, or you know, you can tell I haven't a real job because I'm not really sure what I'm talking about, but promotion or whatever, and then you're like, and now I should retire and fundamentally change my lifestyle, and it's odd. And obviously I know why. Obviously we retire because also we're putting our bodies on the line and they can't do that forever, but almost doing it in the 4-year cycle, I understand why, but then also it's hard. Like you might end up ripping that Band-Aid off too soon, or having, you know, feeling forced into making that decision. So for me, like I definitely knew I wanted to carry on. And, you know, I've said this to my coach already, that like, I'm not planning on retiring after Paris as it stands. That doesn't mean that I'll definitely be in Los Angeles, because aside from anything else, someone could come and trial against me and beat me or whatever. But fundamentally, like right now where I am, and I felt the same in Tokyo, like I don't feel ready to walk away from the sport and what I do, because I just genuinely love it. I think I'm so lucky that my hobby turned into a job, and you know, and the job's going well. Like, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm not kind of ready to walk away. I actually had a really good chat with Joe Ratton recently. He was actually in that development 8 I was talking about before, and obviously he's been to multiple world championships. And she said for her, like it got to the point where the pull of other things that you end up not being able to do because you are in this sport and in this lifestyle became greater than her love for it. And she was like, whilst I still really love rowing and I always will, I wanted to start doing other stuff. And I was like, that's quite a nice place to be in, you know, if you think, yeah, actually still love it, but actually it's holding me back from other things.
Yeah, just waiting until that moment kind of comes to you organically.
Yeah, we've talked about the opportunity cost before, and I think the same for me. It's the point at which in my career where the cost of continuing was higher than that had become higher than I was willing to give. And like for me, like I think if you can look at it, if you can take a step back and look at it that way, it becomes quite an easy decision. It's like, oh, it's okay, I want something else more now. Like that's okay.
And I actually really hate the kind of sacrifice rhetoric, because I don't think it's a sacrifice. I think it's a conscious choice. If anything, if anyone's sacrificing anything, I think it's our nearest and dearest, to be honest. You know, it's our you know, sometimes I joke that, you know, on a Saturday morning, like my husband's a bit of a rowing widow and I'm just off, which is why we got the allotment. I was like, here we go, something for you to do. He's very into his mountain biking, but I think like I never really see it as a sacrifice, because I think that's almost like you're being forced to give something up, and actually I'm making those choices.
Alex Partridge said that he didn't look at it as a sacrifice, it was just what's required in order to succeed.
There's a great book, I can't remember, I think it might have been Paul Thompson. It's a book my dad had, it was on sculling, and no, I don't think it was Paul, I think it was an Australian. Anyway, the final bit of the book is that there's 3 things required for success. and everyone's willing to do the first two and no one wants to do the third. And number one is work out the goal. Number two is work out the price to achieve the goal. Number three is pay it. And it's, if you actually sit anyone down for their goal, if you sit them down and ask them to, well, okay, so what do you want? Well, I want a new car. What would it take for you to do that? Well, you know, I make this much and I spend this much, so I'd have to not go out the weekend, and I'll start making my own lunches, and I won't buy coffees at Starbucks, and in 18 months' time I could have a new car. Well, do it. But I like going out and I like a Starbucks cup. Okay, then you're not willing to pay the price. It kind of becomes like a simple equation.
Yeah,
It's a funny thing that most people know what's required of them.
Yeah.
And it just depends whether you're willing to,
Willing to do
like
it.
you said, do it. Not necessarily sacrifice, just do it. Just do what it takes.
Yeah, most people have the capability to put in the work and cross out that goal, like you said, but it's the sacrifice, you know.
Yeah.
But then
I think that's just perspective. There's an interesting line of perspective. Just by calling it that automatically makes you feel like you're giving something up in order to take something else.
well, my mentor has a great quote, and he says, if you don't sacrifice for your goals, then your goals become the sacrifice.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I think, yeah, like, so for me, like, sort of, carrying on, ticking along with it. And I was just like, yeah, why wouldn't I? I love this job.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And yeah, it's finding new ways to, like I say, not making it stale. And I also think, having been to games now, like, suddenly I find myself, you know, more of one of the veteran athletes, even though as I say, I still feel fresh and like, ooh, that's exciting. And I still find that weird. I still find that an odd one. Like, I came to Leander today actually to kind of give them it's October, so Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and kind of had a bit of a chat with some of the athletes about that. And then Rossi was like, oh, I won't introduce you because I know who you are. And I was like, weird. Can you still introduce me? Because I don't, that's weird. Yeah. Because I was like, oh, okay. I still find that bizarre. I still feel fresh.
Yeah.
Fresh faced.
So I wanted to ask you, obviously you come away from the Paralympic Games with a gold medal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a short cycle because it's only 3 years until the next games. You're all happy, preparing, just turning up to training, and then you get delivered some bad news. What happens?
Yeah, so I was on training camp in May. So I'd actually had from the games to December off, which was a lovely, what a great time that was. Went on holiday, had a lovely time. Started back at training in January. And then, had basically all going well, trained through to March. Then I found a lump when I was on training camp. Just I was in the shower and went home, got it checked. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So I was diagnosed with kind of grade 2, stage 2 triple negative breast cancer. And I knew at the point that I had the diagnosis that I would need chemotherapy, and I would have neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which means chemo before surgery. In my head, I was like, I'm 100% having a double mastectomy. Like, I'm not messing around. And then I was like, what about rowing? How is this going to fit in? And it genuinely was one of the things that crossed my mind almost immediately. Like, what about my career? Because, you know, rowing it's not just a career, really. It's a lifestyle. It's everything you do. And I'd talked to my team. They knew I was having this appointment, and I had also checked with them if it was all right if I flew out a day late, because the whole team was going out the day before on the Wednesday. Mm-hmm. I called Tom Dyson. Nick was still in the air at the time, so he told Nick for me. I called Anne Redgrave, the team doctor, and they were like, sure you still want to come? I was like, yep, because what else am I going to do? And I literally had my parents over and my in-laws over for dinner, and I told them what I knew, which wasn't a lot at the time, and then I went to bed, and my husband dropped me off at the airport the next day. And I remember I was queuing to check in, and for some reason, the psych hadn't flown out on the first day, and she was flying out, and she was like 4 in front of me in the queue in the airport. And I was like, oh, hell no, I am not queuing up next to you, and you psychoanalyzing me with this current life-changing situation I found myself in. Yeah. And so I just wandered off to like Boots for like 15 minutes, and I was like, yep, she's gone through. Okay, cool. And then because I was like, I can't deal. I don't know how I feel right now, so I can't talk to you. And it was so funny because I was like, oh, I'm just going to slip in the nicest way possible, a World Cup. Like, no one's going to notice that I wasn't there. Obviously, my direct team will know. And then I literally turn up at the hotel, and everyone is there in their kit, milling around in the lobby about to take a team photo. And I just walk in with my suitcase and everyone's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Oh, yeah, I didn't know. And I was like, oh, for goodness sake. But yeah, so we raced that World Cup and we won, which was amazing. There was like a teeny tiny % of me, which I was like, what if I can't do this? But actually, I was pretty confident I could. Yeah, and I think really that set the tone for me and my family and my friends, because it's all very well saying this is how I want to live my life and this is what I want to do throughout my diagnosis and treatment, but then you just do it. Like we were saying, you know, you can talk the talk, but here we go, walk the walk. And I think that really set the tone for how I wanted to operate. And, you know, I have said it before, will say it again, I was so supported by kind of a combination of my oncology team, really understanding why it was important to me to keep competing and racing whilst it was safe and sensible, through to communicating with the GB rowing team, with Anne, with Tom, with Nick, that it was okay and sensible for me to do it. And, you know, we had very blunt, open conversations. And sometimes it was them saying, you're not doing this now, when it came to the world champs. And I was like, I still wanted to do it, but we kind of came to the decision that I'd end my season at the Euros instead. And it was kind of complete, perfect collaboration. It was exactly what I needed. And, you know, as I said, Morgan and I basically bounced across in different sections, you know, Oxford, and then she was there. I'd just never done Brooks basically, but that was pretty much like we'd done pretty much everything else. And then she had been selected for the women's seat, and the women's team weren't sending an 8. So you had raced throughout the season with them, and all of a sudden, you know, was facing them kind of last 6-7 weeks of the season without a crew to Cox, and I was stepping back. So it was kind of, things never happen like this. This never works out. And it was perfect because she and I had a really blunt conversation. She was like, I'm not interested in your seat long term. I'm going to step in as a mate and I will do this. And I'll obviously, you know, have a great time and really put my all into it. But then it's your seat. And that was so reassuring for me to kind of, you know, pass the mantle on. And I really also tried to consciously then step back. And I was obviously supporting, but I was like, this is your boat now for the next 2 months. And then I'll come back and get it back. And that's sort of, it was a tough summer, but it was amazing.
No better person than like you said, as if to have Morgan waiting in the wings is perfect. Yeah,
it's not exactly a bad substitute, isn't it? She was fabulous, and I think it was really reassuring, and it was mad because Euros, I think, kind of when it all changed for me, like, and I'd say, like, you know, my other part of my life, because I decided to be public about breast cancer and having it at such a young age. So I was 29 when I was diagnosed and really fit and healthy. Partly because I didn't want to just disappear from the international scene and people think I'd retired, and or people think, oh, a seat's up for grabs or whatever. And it almost felt like I was like hiding from it or embarrassed or ashamed or whatever. And I was like, I'm just going to be really open about it. And I started sharing stuff, partly because one, it's really hard to keep people informed of what's going on in your life when you've got something that big going on and you're in health, because people want to know how you are. And actually it became, I'm not going to lie, a really convenient way to inform quite a large number of people that I was okay and taking along without replying to WhatsApps. Yeah,
have the same conversation 100 times over.
Exactly. And it took the burden off my husband and my parents as well. And then it became a bit more about raising awareness, because as I started posting about things, I was learning things about the realities of breast cancer, of chemotherapy, of living with these sorts of things as a younger woman. So it became a bit more information sharing. And then when I did the Euros, I did a piece for the BBC around it. And I was kind of lucky because the European Champs was part of a wider games that were happening in Munich with about 11 different sports. So it was having even more kind of BBC coverage and stuff.
Okay.
And my social media just went nuts.
Yeah.
And it sort of made me realize that, like, this is bigger than me, and actually this is a really cool opportunity. And I was doing the rowing for me, selfishly, really. Like, I like rowing, I want to race, I'll go race. And became something much, much bigger. And I was like, wow, what kind of privilege this is. And I remember quite early on, someone from my church had said to me, you know, don't ask, oh, why me? Just be like, oh, why me? And, you know, reframe it. And I sort of thought, okay, well, yeah, actually reframing became a really, really important part of my recovery and kind of navigating through it. And I think that's something that is a lesson for anybody really who's going through anything that's tough is just sort of the ability to reframe and rethink and put into context.
Absolutely. I mean, opening up about it, I imagine, wasn't easy. Like putting yourself in front of a camera and just talking about something that's so like deep and personal is a bit daunting. But also, like, you never know how many people are going to watch a video when you tell women to, you know, go and check out if they've got any lumps, and like how many people that could potentially save. I wanted to ask, like, how soon into like the diagnosis, like, you knew that you were going to get through this and beat it, that it wasn't terminal?
So I knew that it was basically the plan was to try and cure. So I knew that. So based on the kind of stage that I'd found it at, which again was one of the reasons that I bang on, you know, about early detection, because fundamentally that is the best thing that you can possibly do to kind of improve your odds. But the biggest kind of, I think, like fear moment was, so I had a lot of chemotherapy because I had triple negative. So basically there are 3 kind of things that a breast cancer cell can be receptive to, which is estrogen, progesterone, or HER2, which is protein. And you basically can have any combination of positives and negatives of all those different types. And I had triple negative, so I was negative to all 3, which basically meant no immunotherapy works. I can't have any kind of hormone blockers and things. You just have to batter it with chemo. And so my first scan was after my first kind of section of chemo, which was about 2 months. So that was kind of mid-September, I think.
Yeah.
I had a scan, and that's the kind of that was the biggie, really, when you were like, how has this worked? You know, I've been battering my body for 2 months. And that was when there was a kind of significant reduction in its size.
Yeah.
And that was huge because I also knew I had 12 chemos to go. So I'm like, this is good. We've started well. And then I had another 12 chemos. And then when I had 3 to go, I had another scan. And it was great because it was an ultrasound. And so you're lying there, and obviously it's a doctor you don't know because it's just kind of a general scan. And then it was great because what they do when you have something, when you're having kind of chemo first, is they'll put a little marker in. It's called a clip, which they basically attach to the cancer cell. So all being well, the cancer dissolves itself and the clip remains, so they know where it was.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in that scan, and they're like, okay. And then they're getting up my old scan results, and I was thinking, well, if you can't find it, this is good. Like, and I'm like lying there, like, like, you can't find it, and this is great. And they basically said it was kind of immeasurable on an ultrasound, and I had 3 chemos to go. So, you know, it was over that kind of period that you're like, oh, okay, this is working, and that was key. And then the big one was it not being in my lymph nodes, which I found out in surgery, which was in January this year. And then they test under a kind of microscope your cells to make sure there's no cancer left from all the tissue they removed. So it's only at that point, you know, you get the all clear sort of call, which is a pretty big moment. That was for me. That was March 15th.
Awesome.
How would you say like going through chemo is, like, in terms of like how do you, for people who are like going through it or like preparing themselves to like go to it now, like what would you compare it to? Like how difficult is it, and what was sort of the shining light at the end of the tunnel for you, that you were like, okay, I'm stronger than this?
Yeah, I think chemo, the worst bit is the first bit, when you don't know how it's going to hit you, because it hits everyone in a really, really different way. There's no one size fits all. You have chemo, there's also so many varieties of chemo. Saying chemotherapy is like an umbrella term for like saying the word painkiller. You can have, you know, ibuprofen, aspirin, paracetamol, all the way through to codeine and morphine, you know, and anything that's like helps you manage pain. Yeah. It's a bit like that with chemotherapy. It can come in all shapes and forms. It can be pill form, IV, it can be kind of directly fed into veins, all these sorts of things. So for me, chemo was the biggest fear was starting a new one, because you don't know how it's going to hit you.
Yeah.
And then it actually is quite gradual. So once you get over the first bit and you're like, okay, this is where I am, it's quite gradual. So whilst you can see the changes happening, you're living them. I think where it's weird when you, like my husband, for example, will be living those changes with me. But my parents, who I saw every few weeks, would come back and they'd be like, oh, wow, you know, you've gone worse. It's caught up on you. Or I think it was quite hard for some of the rowers who I saw before they left for the World Championships and I didn't see them again till after the break. You know, I looked a lot worse. I was struggling a lot more. And so it's those sorts of things which are really hard. Even now, I look back at pictures of myself from a year ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, I look awful. I look so tired and puffy. But at the time, it's not really changed much from the day before or 2 days before. So you don't notice it in yourself.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest challenges for me with chemotherapy was the brain fog. So the best way to describe it is almost like you're constantly living in that bit where you've just woken up potentially with a hangover, like on a Sunday after a heavy night.
Okay.
But like, you know, when someone's talking to you and you're like, what are you on about? And then like, it's as simple as, where did I put this thing? And you're like, what? And, you know, it's like basic things. And for me, who, you know, I've come across in this, I'm like, I'm fairly switched on, quite bubbly, quite whatever. I think that was probably the biggest, hardest thing for me, because if I'm honest, I felt really stupid. I felt really slow, like I was like walking through treacle. And I think that was really tough. And sort of having confidence that would go was quite a big thing, you know, because my job is about being switched on, is about being really aware and noticing things and all that sort of thing. So that was tough. And like, I remember the first time you're saying about sharing, like I remember the first time I sort of showed myself basically with pretty much no hair on Instagram. Like I was really nervous about that and stuff, even though like, people following me knowing I'm having chemotherapy. I wore like a lot of baseball caps because weirdly I lost loads of hair, like in the crowd, like a backwards monk. Like I lost loads here, but I kind of kept a lot of it around the edge. So if I was wearing a baseball cap, you wouldn't really know. So that was kind of, you know, weird.
Yeah.
But then, you know, once I went fully bald, I sort of just lent into it, to be honest. And I'm not going to lie, like when you get that much poorlier, your kind of need for empathy grows and your need for consideration and stuff like that. And particularly when we were going into the winter, as I was getting to the big points of my chemo, I just didn't want someone coughing near me. I was like, come on. So actually almost going out and about into town and wearing a headscarf, or it being more obvious you had cancer or were ill, the stuff I really almost shied away from at the beginning, I almost lent into, because I was like, do you know what? I'd love it if someone offered to help carry my bag right now or didn't cough in my face.
Yeah.
Or like, we're like, I'll give you a hug. Oh, I've got a cold. You know, actually that's better. Yeah. So, you know, you sort of evolve. I had chemo over 5 months. So, you know, it was a long process.
That's a long time, absolutely. But you all through with it now? Do you still have any treatments remaining, or are you all in the clear and back to your best self?
Yeah, definitely all in the clear, which is great. And I had my double mastectomy in January, and then I had actually a further reconstruction surgery 2 weeks ago. So I am like now fully done for surgery. Kind of, I'm pretty mobile now. I'm not really driving. That's just kind of building that one back in. But other than that, like I'm pretty good. So yeah, it should be, give it another week or two and then full foot down, getting ready for Paris.
Awesome.
So then in terms of moving forward, like in something I was sort of interested in, and people talk about you've been given sort of a different perspective. Obviously, it sort of can change how you view stuff. I think for small things that can be really great. Like I probably don't get that angry in the car anymore or things like that. But in terms of like rowing, obviously it's quite a big part of your life and it's something that's important to take, really important. How did it have an effect on that? Did it make you feel like it wasn't as important or more important? And like what can be gained, I guess, from talking about the experience that not everyone is going to have, hopefully, but maybe could still kind of like take some advice from.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So weirdly, during cancer treatment, it felt more important. You know, it felt like it was something to really work towards and push towards. And I think it really gave me a gratitude for the fact that this is my job. And there can far too easily be times when you get annoyed by something that's so not important, and you just have to have a bit of a like context being like, come on, this is actually pretty cool that you get to do this. So I think it made me appreciate that even more. I think weirdly, the rowing's not that important thing came to me more actually during the pandemic, when people were like, oh, the Olympics is cancelled and Paralympics cancelled. And I was like, there's a global pandemic. Like, of course it should be cancelled. That almost came for me there. So weirdly, then when I was going through my treatment, it became more important to me. And I think for me, like, I definitely would say I've got more of a perspective. And I'd say things like birthdays, I wasn't a big birthday princess or person, but like, I think less so about like, I'm alive for my birthday, but more I've had friends who've passed away in the last weeks, to be honest, who don't get to have any more birthdays, and they're in their 30s. Yeah. And I think it's things like that which I'm like, oh shit, like this is where it's really real. And in all honesty, sometimes I'm genuinely watching the telly and there's a Macmillan advert with Cancer Research UK and they're talking about it. And then I genuinely, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I had cancer. Because almost like you normalize it, it's actually like I still haven't worked out how to get it into conversation yet. When you go like, oh, I had breast cancer last year, but I'm fine now, because everyone's like, I don't know how to react to you. And I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But I definitely have like way more appreciation for life and what I am really lucky to do. And I think for me, I got diagnosed and one of my early thoughts were like, what about rowing? Which is so ridiculous. But actually, like, how lucky that is. Like, how great is that I had that to think about, and that I had that goal. And a lot of people said, oh, why did you carry on? And I'm like, well, if I'd have thought, well, this is an opportunity to stop, then maybe I'm not doing the right thing. Yeah. Maybe that wouldn't have been where I should be in my life at that point. And actually, it made me realize, to be honest, I really like my life, which is what a great thing to have. Like, I love Henley. I love living around here. I'm so lucky. I've got great friends, great family. Like, some people really struggle when they get ill because people back off and shy away because it's an uncomfortable situation. But like, I experienced none of that. Like, I just experienced kind of instead people gathering around me, which was amazing. And that was at work, at home and everything. So I think, you know, if hopefully you don't have to have something quite as major as this, but I think it's thinking about, I do genuinely think, you know, life is too short to do things that make you unhappy, fundamentally.
Yeah, Tom has a good quote about that from Jim Carrey.
Yeah, his dad, he talked about how his dad was a really funny guy, and he could have been a good comedian, but he had a wife and 2 young kids. So he got like a really safe, boring job that he hated. And like after 18 months, he got made redundant. So they got stuck in a mess anyway. So he said, you can fail at what you don't want. So you may as well have a go at what you do want. Yeah. I think failures can be everywhere and it's part of life. And I think that's really the fact that it gave you like, it almost like backed up that you were doing what you want to do. Because sometimes I think with rowing, something like rowing, it's so all-encompassing that it's difficult to have the context of being like, am I actually here because I want to be, or am I here because I'm trying to prove it to someone else, or just to myself that I was good enough? We had that kind of discussion with Lola, and I guess like to have the opportunity to step back and like if that's something you can take. And again, sort of remembered speaking to Al Sinclair when we were like, how, you know, because for a long part of his career he rowed without any success, and we just said, how did you do that? How did you muscle through? How did you keep going? It's like, I just like decided, was I enjoying my life? Like, am I enjoying where I was living? Am I enjoying the people I'm spending time with? Like, oh, I like it. Like, I'll keep going. It's interesting to hear the same thing from a different perspective. I think that's like the most important thing you can kind of look back if you want to step back. It's just like, am I happy here? And like, there is some opportunity cost and I could be doing some other things, but am I enjoying what I'm doing? I think that's the simplest part of life.
Yeah. And it's made me also really think about, you know, like the social impact or responsibility that maybe I feel. Not every athlete kind of necessarily has it, but you know, I've got like the other side of basically being able to do what I do and do it for a living is I do have kind of a bit of a platform. And generally speaking, it's a relatively, small platform of people, but I think it's that sphere of influence that you can have a really positive influence on someone's life. And like you say, it's whether that's someone checking themselves and finding something they might not have found before, through to kind of helping that next generation of people. And I think that's something that I didn't realize I had so much enjoyment in, and that's something that's really lucky to do.
Yeah, like also showing that it can be done, and sort of like leading the way, serving as an inspiration to older people, younger people, or people who are going to follow in a similar path in their life as well.
Yeah, no one's got a platform for everyone, so it doesn't really matter if you have a small or a big platform. If one person's helped, that's all you really need, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And like, I think there's so many studies about exercise and cancer, all the way through from. So like, people don't think breast cancer is a lifestyle factor influenced cancer, but it is. Whilst there's obviously a lot of other things and genetic and luck, just like a lot of these things, actually kind of diet and lifestyle does impact it, partly because of the amount of estrogen you're producing, whether you're healthy or less healthy, and that has an impact. And so there's all the way through from diagnosis and kind of getting breast cancer and being diagnosed with it, through to managing treatment of side effects and chemotherapy. And that is obviously goes across any type of cancer you might have, but exercising during chemotherapy is literally proven to reduce side effects. And then on the other side of cancer, there's incredible statistics about people who are doing, the government mandated amount of exercise on the other side of it, and their survival rates over 5 years. It's huge. So it's really interesting. It's definitely something that is becoming more and more common in the rhetoric of cancer specialists and oncologists and support charities, is actually, who knew movement is really good for you. So, it's great to be able to do that as well, and kind of a positive way. And particularly, I hope my message comes through in a little bit of a more realistic way than if I was actually a rower, because I'm a coxswain that chooses to exercise alongside my athletes. So I am a professional athlete, yes. But, in a race, I use my mind. And maybe that is useful for bringing the message home, because, if I was a rower and I was, 6 foot and absolutely stacked, they'd be like, yeah, all right then.
Yeah, of course you want to exercise.
Yeah. Whereas actually, I maybe don't look like the person that does exercise, so it's all right.
I think I've just realized that the coxes are some of the only people in rowing who actually have to have good hand-eye coordination.
Yeah.
With steering. It does come in handy, it turns out, in rowing.
Yeah, definitely. And also the ability to you've got to work 60 meters ahead.
Yeah. It's a lot of
look forward.
Yeah.
It's a good walk for life.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we're just going to ask you some quick fire round questions.
Oh, okay.
What are some of your favorite rowing venues that you've trained at, visited, or raced at?
I'd say Lake Bled in Slovenia.
Oh, yeah.
What a stereotype, but oh my gosh, amazing, beautiful. And I have really just personally fond memories of Varese. I spent a lot of my life there, so thankfully I do really love it. But on a flat day, Varese, I don't think you can beat it. The mountains out, and it's definitely one of those pinch me moments.
Nice lake. The colour of the water is quite unique as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like Banyeles, it's got its own little tint of blue. Yeah.
Sure.
Well, doesn't Caversham on a flat day make it into the top?
Please.
If I
get into the top places I have been. But if I'm getting off to have a breakfast burrito, then it does sort of lift the vibe. But yeah.
Fair enough. What are some of the races that you'd like to, or regattas that you'd like to do again or repeat, or if you could go back in time and do again when you're 60 or 70?
Oh, I'd say one of my favorite ever races I'd love to relive was Met Regatta in 2014. Yeah, I know I've done some big races, but this is one of the biggies, is because I was with my boat race crew, and we'd done the boat race, and then we were kind of going and proving ourselves to the rest of the rowing world, which at that point, boat race crews weren't really doing that as much. And then we were racing a GB development boat. A lot of those women I ended up going to Cox in that kind of development era, and Henry Fieldman was coxing. And we were massive underdogs. And we shot out and sort of got 5 seats up, and then experienced probably what I would say is the slowest row through of my entire life, where I could literally hear every single call that Henry was saying next to me. And they got in front of us by that bow ball, and then about 1100 to go, like you said, when Morgan says, we need to go, I kind of had that relationship with those women, and I just remember being like, we got to go now. And we managed to basically row through them and win by a canvas.
Right.
And it was just one of the best. I just remember like what no one really talks about. So when you cox an amazing race, I get the shakes big time afterwards, because I have so much adrenaline that I have not put anywhere, and it just comes out, and you're like, like, you know, and you're fizzing, it's mad. And that was probably one of the first times that I'd really kind of had that in a 2K side by side. So that would be one of the amazing ones. And if I could do it again and change the result, would probably be one of the same seasons, and maybe doing it at Henley Women's, because I have never had a good regatta at Henley Women's. I have underperformed in every single crew that I have done. So I will not be retiring until I've won Henley Women's. I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh, good.
If anyone's looking for
yeah. Yeah, let me know. Because that race, you guys won't have done it, runs out on you really fast, and because it comes at you, and obviously if you're familiar with the Henley stretch, you're like, and then we get to the enclosure, there's no enclosure, it's the end. And so I'd love to have a lovely little run of Henley Women's. I think that would be pretty fun.
I like those good answers.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll get to do that. I'm sure, and I hope a crew will pick you up on that.
Of course they won't. The question I ask is, if you could travel back in time to the age you were when you really first fell in love with rowing, what advice would you give your younger self?
I'd say almost kind of don't try and be like other coxes, and just what you're doing is good enough. Just keep plugging away at that. Because I definitely think I went through a stage or a phase where I thought I should be like X or Y, or I'd listen to someone else's recording and be like, that's what that should be, and that's how it should be. And actually, like we said when we were talking about the boat race stuff, why did you get selected? I think, well, because I hadn't followed the book or the process. And so I think it would probably be just to kind of don't try and imitate, and just try and do your own thing. I think that probably would have helped me and built more confidence a little bit earlier on, which kind of might have served me a little bit better in some of those races that I did.
Love that, focusing on your strengths.
Yeah.
So I've just got one last question.
Okay.
Who are some of your rowing idols, or people that you've looked up to, or you still look up to?
I'd say Catherine Grange is a big one.
DKG.
Oh, because like I even see her now. I saw her as at the Women of the Year Awards recently, and she was there, and I went up and said hello, and she was so lovely and gave me a hug, and even so I was like, Catherine Grange, she's just so cool.
That's awesome. That's
awesome. You know, I read her book before I even kind of got properly into it. And I even remember, so I coxed her, it was kind of pre-Rio when they were maybe looking, her and Vicky were maybe looking at coming into the 8, and they jumped in our boat a little bit. And I just remember being like, have you got any feedback? And she was just so kind. And she is probably kind of one of those athletes that I look up to, because I don't think, to be honest, she gets enough respect for literally her medal count is outrageous over such a long period of time. Amazing. And then I also really, really respect her from the way that she was an athlete. You know, she is humble and generous in her time, and kind of treated everyone, you know, my experience at Caversham, whether you were like me and just dropping in to do some development stuff, through to kind of you've been to multiple games, there was kind of real fairness around the way that she kind of operated around the building. Was someone I really looked up to. And then the other person probably be Sam Townsend, who I obviously lived with for a number of years, who I would say is someone who almost doesn't have the medal count to his name that he deserves. He is the ultimate gentleman, such a hard grafter. And I don't know how someone was that successful when they have Wheatos every day for breakfast. Like, he was such a champ. And so, yeah, again, I think interestingly, it's not necessarily about their medal count or then, you know, vis-a-vis successes. It's the way they were athletes. And I think, you know, that's something I hope that I kind of try and take on and pass down to that next generation. That it's about more than just performances.
I love that epic answer, and both those people would love to get on a podcast. I also love focusing on not on their medal tally, but like on their character, because you can just learn so much more from these people, like with so much experience in the area that you want to go into. So no, that's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. I love to hear when the greats are great. You know what I mean? Like Catherine, like, and you meet that person and she's great. And or like when the Michael Jordan documentary came out, you know, and you were just, I remember watching it thinking, I really hope he actually is great. You know, what I don't want to hear is everyone saying he was such a dick.
Yeah.
And you're like, you want to believe that the great people are great. And Catherine's like one of those, like personifies it. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think we're so lucky that they're both still involved in our sport.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, and Catherine running UK Sport, but then you've got Sam Townsend's obviously running the program over at Radley. And you just think these are the sorts of people you want, you know, representing us. And I think it's really cool that people still want to stay in the sport and give back as well.
If all the good people leave, we're screwed.
Yeah, I know.
Awesome. Erin, listen, it's been absolutely fantastic to have a chat, hear about your story of how you got into coxing, how you fell in love with the sport, how you then became a Paralympic champion, and obviously the most recent story of like how you overcame breast cancer, which I think it's a really inspirational thing. And I'm glad that we're able to like share it out with other people who will hopefully learn or avoid some of the pitfalls that otherwise they would have been facing. So no, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast, and at some point I'd love to have you on again.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, it's been really good. We've talked a lot before about controlling the controllables and being ready for that thing that's going to go wrong. And you know, there's no bigger example of that curveball than what's happened to you. So I think for anyone, like talking about perspective, which has kind of been a theme of this one as well, you know, for anyone going through things or struggling or whatever, like I think hopefully there'll be some really good advice in there for how to deal with those things. And I really appreciate you having your time, and obviously best of luck for the rest of the season. We'll be keeping an eye on things, and maybe next summer we'll get another chat with you.
Oh yeah, hopefully with another big gold medal around my neck.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Absolutely. Best of luck for Paris. And I think that concludes everything for today's episode. So on that note, easy there.
Cue the music.